amount of reserve made out of profits for a period by a company for research and development against their chargeable tax. Claim of capital allowance on capital allowances on plant and machinery used for R&D activities, that's accelerated capital allowances. Pioneer status tax holiday for R&D companies. Companies and other organizations that invest in R&D facility for commercialization can claim a tax credit of up to 20% of the cost of their qualifying expenditure, among others. The growth of the Nigerian oil and gas industry is very crucial to the economic development of Nigeria, being a single sector that contributes the largest income to the Nigerian economy. Research and development is essential for the growth and sustainability of the Nigerian oil and gas industry. By investing in R&D, the industry can improve exploration and production, reduce environmental impact, develop local content, and improve safety and security. This can help the industry remain competitive and contribute to the country's economic development. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, saddled with the administration of taxes in Nigeria, and indeed the administration of all tax incentives, will continue to support all companies in Nigeria to take advantage of available fiscal incentives provided by the Nigerian tax laws and any other enabling act. We believe that the tax savings from these incentives will stimulate growth and productivity of companies in the sector, resulting to improved profitability and overall improved tax revenue. I believe that the assemblage of experts in this gathering will be of immense impact to the taxpayers in the oil and gas industry, as it will provide meaningful insight and education of available tax incentives for research and development in the sector and in Nigerian business environment at large. I therefore urge everyone present here today to take advantage of the wealth of knowledge in this gathering and network opportunity it will provide. I thank you and God bless.
Thank you, sir. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the demonstration of the commitment of the FIRS to providing excellent tax administration services to all stakeholders has never been in doubt. And yes, today's event is yet another intervention in the demonstration of that resolve. You heard it from the fine gentleman who just spoke with us. It's very important that, yes, these tax incentives exist to attract more investment, stimulate economic growth, and directly improve revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, that was none other than the Senior Special Assistant to the Executive Chairman of the FIRS, Mr. Gabriel Ogunjemilusi. A round of applause for him. Thank you very much for delivering those words on behalf of the Executive Chairman of the FIRS, Mr. Mohammed Nami. Please extend our regards to the EC of FIRS. Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the journey of NCDMB started in 2010. And interestingly, yes, it has been a journey with interesting points all across that positive trajectory. We have a video that will be displayed on the screen right about now, our journey and achievements, the NCDMB story. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back and relax, fasten your seatbelts, and let's watch the video.
Since the enactment of the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development NOGIC Act in April 2010, many companies, individuals, and state governments across the country have been benefiting from the implementation processes which has transformed the Nigerian oil and gas industry. One of the earliest policies of the NCDMB is the Nigerian Oil and Gas Park Scheme, NOGAPS. And it is designed to nurture in-country manufacturing of components and equipment used in the oil and gas industry and linkage sectors. The parks are being developed at different parts of the country. The parks have created hundreds of employment opportunities in the construction phase and would employ over 2,000 persons per location when they become fully functional. The appointment of engineer Simbi Kesie Obote as the executive secretary of NCDMB in September 2016 and the introduction of the Nigerian Content 10-year strategic roadmap increased the tempo of Nigerian content implementation. One of the biggest projects NCDMB has executed is the 17-story Nigerian Content Tower. This iconic building was constructed by an indigenous contractor and it recorded impressive Nigerian content achievements. In support of the federal government's decade of gas declaration, the NCDMB is partnering key investors to develop critical projects in the gas value chain across the country. Some of NCDMB's new projects at the Oloibiri Museum have been developed by the Petroleum Technology Development Fund, PTDF, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, NCDMB, the Bayelsa State Government, and Shell Petroleum Development Company, SPDC, and its joint venture partners, Nigerian National Petroleum Company, Total Exploration and Production Company, and the Nigerian Ajib Oil Company. The board is also developing the NCDMB Conference Hotel Project, CHP, to provide suitable accommodation for guests that attend events at the board's facilities.
Stakeholders for a very long time have tried to see how they can actually, if you like, commemorate that event of commercial oil find in Oloibiri. But that project has been in the works for more than 36 years. If you don't have anything for future generation to come and see how we transited effectively, all we will hear is stories, books that people wrote, but we cannot see things that represented that era. So that is what the initial thinkers wanted to establish in Oloibiri.
With a view to ensuring petroleum product sufficiency and develop local content, NCDMB is partnering with investors.
Today we are signing the shareholders agreement for the Brass Petroleum Depot. A few months ago, some months ago, the president also approved the construction of the Oloibiri Museum, which has been something that has been conceived for the past 30-something years and has never seen the light of day. The Oloibiri Museum is moving at a very steady pace under the leadership of Mr. President, and today we are signing the shareholders agreement for the construction of the petroleum depot in the heart of the Niger Delta.
In human capacity development, NCDMB has trained about 12,000 persons in different skill areas since the enactment of Nigerian Content Act in 2010. This is geared to build capacity for the oil and gas industry and related sectors and make young Nigerians self-reliant. The board has made huge investments in research and development, such as its support for Amal Technology in Abuja to produce smoke gas detectors and other accessories, and the establishment of research centers of excellence in 6 selected universities across the country. NCDMB had also donated information and technology laboratories to schools across the country and renovated technical colleges at Abak, Akwa Ibom State, Port Harcourt, Amole in Enugu, and the University of Ibadan, Oyo State. The $350 million Nigerian Content Intervention Fund is also hugely successful and has recorded 98% success rate in disbursement and repayment. The NOGIC Act has made a huge difference in the oil and gas industry, and the implementation of the Nigerian Content 10-year strategic roadmap is on track.
Ladies and gentlemen, for a journey that started in the year 2010 with the mandate to increase local content and develop in-country capacity in the oil and gas industry. You will agree with me that the NCDMB has pursued that vigorously on the tripod of creation of jobs, creation of wealth and opportunities, and increase in local content. That video was a fitting prelude to the keynote address that will be delivered shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please a warm round of applause for the NCDMB. Thank you very much for your generosity. All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this point we will take the keynote address, and yes, that will be delivered by none other than the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, NCDMB. Ladies and gentlemen, he is a celebrated and awarded champion of local content. And yes, it is my singular honor to invite on stage for the keynote address the Executive Secretary, NCDMB, Engineer Simbi Wabote, FNSE, FIPS. Please keep the applause coming until he gets on stage. Yes, sir. Have the floor.
Thank you, MC. I can see that people are too serious here. Is it because of taxation? Don't worry, it's a workshop. We are not going to start taxing you immediately. Let me recognize the presence of the chairman of FIROS, my good friend, Mohammed. I guess he would have been here. I've been wanting him to visit Yenagoa for a while, but I'm sure exigencies of the office. But he's ably represented here by Senior Technical Assistant. Let me recognize a member of the board of NCDMB, Governing Council, Mr. Mina Aforiokumar, and also recognize my Director, Planning, Research and Statistics, Patrick Desiba Oba, and also the representative of the Tax Association, I guess, and then management and staff of NCDMB, our invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Yenagoa, the city of hope. And it is known as the glory of all land by Elsa State. I am delighted to address you all at this Nigerian oil and gas industry suppliers tax incentive awareness workshop. Before I delve into my presentation, I used to remember tax collectors in those days. They used to put on a coverall where they write tax collectors. And in those days, when our parents see them, they start jumping fence. Because when you ask them, they say the tax man is coming. But today, they are very well dressed, and you don't even know who they are because they've gone very digital in the collection of taxes. This workshop is in tandem with Section 70 of the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act 2010, which mandates NCDMB to organize conferences, workshops, seminars, symposia, training, and road shows, and other public education fora to further the attainment of the goal of the development of local content in the Nigerian oil and gas industry. The board is leveraging the enabling business environment pillar of its 10-year strategic roadmap to collaborate with the Federal Inland Revenue Service in creating a platform for engaging oil and gas industry stakeholders on tax incentives available to companies that invest in research and development. This workshop is also based on provisions of the Finance Act 2021 and other ex-ante tax codes relating to research and development. Globally, There is a consensus on the adoption of the triple helix model to foster partnership between the academia, industry, and government to foster market-driven research which advances the socio-economic development of nations. This tripartite collaboration requires the combination of human, financial, and policy incentives to attract needed funding critical to the growth of research in our industry. Indeed, the level of technological advancement in most developed economies is a result of a combination of government providing the enabling environment and the private sector providing the funds needed for research and development. It is on record how nations such as the United States of America and Germany have used tax credit schemes to motivate researchers to look into ways of solving problems and enhancing creativity. Countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia have similar arrangements in place to promote research and development. Egypt, for example, has investment tax allowance, ITA, for many related R&D sectors, such as energy, engineering, and sciences. The UK created incentives to boost investment in research and development through the Research and Development Tax Relief Schemes for small businesses and Research and Development Expenditure Credit Scheme. Saudi Arabia has a tax deduction scheme available to research and development related expenditures. Morocco also has incentives that span across several industries and corporate tax credits for research and development investments. In Nigeria, we have also commenced a journey of creating meaningful and addressing our peculiar challenges by leveraging our own natural endowments. The 1% NCDF levy enshrined in the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act 2010 is a typical example of statutory provisions to support local content development in the oil and gas sector. The application of the Nigerian Content Development Fund to facilitate direct interventions in assets acquisition, contract financing, working capital, and manufacturing for players in the sector through the instrumentality of the Nigerian Content Intervention Fund created by NCDMB. This clearly shows how government support drives growth in our industry. Indeed, access to the Nigerian Content Intervention Fund by local supply chain has been one of the major contributors to the growth of local content level from less than 5% in 2010 to 54% in 2022. We are pushing for similar performance in research and development by sharpening our focus on the various elements that will enable the growth and appreciable impact of research and development in our economy. In 2019, NCDMB developed its 10-year research and development roadmap, which detailed dedicated research funding and requisite commercial framework as part of the success pillars for the development of research in the Nigerian oil and gas sector. The roadmap is anchored on 8 key pillars and 42 initiatives, which we have been driving in the last 4 years. One of the key pillars is funding, which led to the launch of the $50 million Nigerian Content Research and Development Fund to drive basic research, commercialization of research breakthroughs, establishment of centers of excellence, and to sponsor university endowments. While the fund is available for research grants, we understand that government should not be the sole provider of funds for research. The bulk of research and development funding should come from the private sector, who are business owners and will ultimately benefit directly from the research outcomes. Analysis of budgets of leading Fortune 500 companies such as Apple, Walmart, Amazon revealed that they commit between 5 to 10% of their annual budget on research and development, and in return, they have innovative products that has enabled them to make significant tax returns to government, create more employment opportunities than most governments, and remain market leaders. This is our dream for Nigerian oil and gas service companies. Following expert analysis, the need to promote and educate companies in the sector on the tax regime, incentives, and benefits available for research and development within the Nigerian tax code was identified as critical to private sector investment in research and innovation. Diagnostics of the level of research and development funding by the private sector in Nigeria indicates some form of apathy, which is attributable in part to dearth of information on available incentives and benefits of funding in carrying out research. The consequence is not only significant capital flight in the acquisition of technology required for oil and gas projects and operations, but also players in the sector are tied to the apron and direct control of the foreign supply chain who control the technological advances arising from their research and development activities. In terms of strategic intent, therefore, this tax awareness workshop is intended to highlight the inherent benefits of investing in research and development and showcase mutual benefits to both the private sector and government separately and collectively. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, through this workshop, will do a deep dive and provide critical insight into the incentives inherent in the Finance Act 2021 and how companies that invest in research and development can benefit from tax credits. Surely, opportunity does exist within our tax laws for the industry to tap the benefits derived from investing in research and development. Workshops like this provide the necessary education and enlightenment to enable businesses position themselves appropriately to benefit from making research an integral part of their business model. We have high hopes that this workshop will rectify gross underfunding of research in Nigeria, which is currently estimated at less than 0.2% of the national budget. It is our expectations that through this awareness that we will be created from this workshop, the private sector will reverse this trend and increase funding for our industry. I must stress that we can no longer neglect research and development as it is key to local content development, enhancement of future tax revenue to government, development of homegrown solutions, and retention of industry spending within the Nigerian financial institutions. It is a no-brainer that once a sustainable research and development investment culture is attained, it will be mutually beneficial to the public and the private sector. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, it is worth mentioning that the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board and the Federal Inland Revenue Service have complementary mandates. The board is responsible for promoting the development of local content in the oil and gas industry, while the FIROS is responsible for collecting taxes on behalf of the government of Nigeria. It is therefore instructive that the two government agencies have seen the need to forge a strong collaboration to drive government's aspiration to develop local technology with consequential impact on increasing government revenue from taxation. To this end, I will employ all of us to dedicate our energy to the following three themes. Firstly, we need to sustain interagency collaboration. Secondly, we need to forge strong alliances and partnerships across the borders of government agencies to the private sector. And finally, now is the time to act and implement all the great ideas and opportunities on the table. This must not just be another talk shop. We must join hands together to bring our initiatives into reality. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for listening, and once again, welcome to this great workshop. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Have a good photograph. All right, we'll have a group photograph right about now. And interestingly, the growth of local content as addressed by the ES, 5% in 2010, and today it is 54%. That beats the target that was set in the 10-year roadmap. I think that is deserving of a round of applause. Thank you very much, sir, for providing strong leadership to the board. And yes, the NCDMB is always exploring partnerships with linkage sectors. All right, we'll have a group photograph right about now. Please join me to welcome Mr. Mina Oferokuma. Please join him on stage. Member Governing Council, NCDMB, please join me on stage. Director, Planning, Research and Statistics, Mr. Patrick Daziba Oba, please on stage for this group photograph. GM Research, Statistics and Development Division, Mr. Abdul Malik Halilu, please join him on stage for this group photograph. The representative of the Executive Chairman, FIRS, the SSA to the EC, Mr. Gabriel Ogunjamilusi, please on stage for this photograph. Thank you. All of our lead presenters, please on stage for this photograph. All our moderators, please be on stage for this photograph. Thank you. Paparazzi, that is your cue. We are still waiting for the full complement of all those who will be in this group photograph. All our moderators and lead presenters, please be on stage for this group photograph. All right, you probably have to take that picture 1,001 times because now we have a full complement. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, once again, allow me to beg your indulgence. Please give a round of applause to the Executive Secretary, NCDMB, Engineer Simbi, KCA Wabote, FNSC, FIPS, for that keynote address. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have our work cut out for us. Remember, this workshop is not going to be another talk shop, and yes, our consultants, Camp and Pride Limited, are on hand to document the recommendations that will be derived from this workshop, and yes, that will form the thrust of a policy document to be implemented by the NCDMB and the FIRS. We have 3 presentations lined up, and the first presentation will be delivered shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome on stage. Our first lead presenter is none other than the General Manager, Research, Statistics and Development Division of the NCDMB. Please make welcome Mr. Abdul Malik Halilu. A round of applause for him as he takes the stage. Hi, GM, sir. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Put off the slides, please. Put off the slides. Put off the slides.
Let me just test the slides to be sure it's working. Is it working? Okay, I'll just prompt you. Can it? Okay. Just wanted to be sure that technology will not fail us in the course of the presentation. So, distinguished delegates, permit me to stand on the already established protocol. So my presentation will focus on the provisions of the NOGIC Acts on R&D, the R&D operating model currently implemented by NCDMB, and then also the technology development imperatives for local content implementation. Okay, by way of a background, Nigeria is a hydrocarbon resource-rich country with 206,000 trillion standard cubic feet of gas and 37 billion barrels of crude oil. We rank among the top 10 economies in the world in terms of hydrocarbon resources. Hydrocarbon is so important to our economy that it accounts for over 60% of our annual budget and 80% of our foreign exchange earnings. However, the oil and gas sector contributes less than 10% to our gross domestic production. It is for this reason and to reset our priorities that the government decided to enact the local content policy so that the focus will shift from revenue from oil to in-country value addition from upstream, midstream, and downstream activities in the oil and gas sector. The expectation is that the upstream activities, exploration, field development, production, midstream activities, storage facilities, line pipes, and of course, downstream activities, the refinery units, and also the dispensing units in our retail markets will be dominated by in-country sources. That is the expectations on the reason why local content was enacted. Therefore, the philosophy around local content is not about indigenization or ensuring that Nigerians own all the businesses in the oil sector, but it's mainly around domiciliation of in-country value. And the heart of domiciliation of in-country value is technology development. If you don't have a vibrant technology ecosystem, you will not be able to maximize the benefits associated with the inputs from the oil and gas value chain. It is for this reason that the local content philosophy is so important to Nigeria and of course our own dear sector. Through the local content program, the expectation is that the marine assets that are deployed for deep offshore operations will not only be fabricated in country, but also be operated by Nigerians. To fabricate a vessel means that you must also have the capabilities around designing the vessels, around construction of the various units, and also making sure that you meet international certifications. Without that, then all you need to be doing is to import already built vessels from foreign countries. That is already capital flights. And all you are getting is vessels coming into Nigeria, getting their day rates, and then capital flight continues. So the expectation of local content is that ownership of marine vessels and assets should be in the hands of Nigerians. It's also to create employment for our people, value chain optimization, making sure that we have enough refining capacity, also poverty alleviation in host communities where this oil is explored. Ultimately, the essence of the local content program is to increase local production of goods and services and contribute to our gross domestic production. Because of the importance of the local content law and the nexus between local content and technology development, the NOGIC Act made specific provisions on R&D because it's research and development that drives technology development. The NOGIC Act made specific provisions requiring the operators in the industry to submit research and development plans on a revolving basis. The research and development plans must demonstrate where the research will be conducted in Nigeria, which means we must have research and development centers, how the research will be delivered, which means that we must have a team that can deliver the research, and then ultimately application of the products of research for industry application, which means that the research must be market-driven. So for this reason, there are two imperatives that we must address as an organization. One is to build capacity, and the other is to ensure that we enforce compliance with the provision of the NOGIC Act, which means we must continuously demand for R&D plans, ensure that they're executed, and also they deliver the necessary value. Research without value creation does not amount to anything. So it's important that all these fundamentals are in place. To deliver on that, we came up with the Research and Development Implementation Framework, which defines our scope in terms of involvement in the R&D value chain. Our commitment is to ensure that every dollar spent pursuant to the provisions of the NOGIC Act on R&D is tied to addressing an industry challenge. It's also to ensure that basic research, applied research are carried out in a manner that demonstrates capacity of our universities to conduct research. Research also requires that there should be prototype development to determine the validity and viability of the research products. We have established the Technology, Innovation and Incubation Center to provide the necessary environment for prototype development and commercialization of research. Recently, we had the approval of the Federal Executive Council for the Library, Museum and Research Center, which is also going to be a testing center for the purpose of research. Our partnership with our sister agencies, like the Nigeria Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, ensures that we are able to push for the adoption of products of research that meet industry standards. To drive this aspiration is the ultimate need to incentivize commercialization of research. And that is the essence of why we're having this engagement. How do we incentivize the private sector to not just conceptualize research, but fund research through the value chain until proprietary technology is developed out of the efforts of research? In doing this, we are mindful of the expectations of the NOGIC Act on NCDMB as an organization and the local content program for Nigeria. The opportunity landscape that we see in the NOGIC Act also has some level of requirements for us to maximize those opportunities for our country. The schedule to the Act has made specific provisions in the threshold for Nigerian content on close to 200 services. For example, tow and supply vessel, 90% spend. What that means is that for any tender that requires a tow and supply vessel, 90% of the spend must be in country. That means from the construction of the vessel, the ownership of the vessel, manning of the vessel, consumables, catering services, repairs and maintenance should aggregate to 90% of the total spend for the duration of the tender. For valves, 60% is the threshold. That means for any tender, the total volume of valves required, Nigerian content requires that 60% must be produced locally. Now, it's not just the number, it's also the value. 6% by value, but 60% by volume. So for every provision in the NOGIC Act and every threshold requires that capabilities must be developed in country. What have we seen so far? We have seen a situation where, I'll take the case study of valve, R&D foreign, design engineering foreign, which means the specifications for the valves in terms of flow assurance, and also the material requirements, the longevity, the adaptability of a typical valve. All the research around it is done abroad, and then the softwares that you use to design is also carried out in foreign countries. Same thing with raw material sourcing for the different components of the valves, because typically what happens is that the different components are produced by different manufacturing shop floors, and then an OEM comes to couple it, and then it's exported to Nigeria as a finished product. Or in some cases, CKDs are imported, and then all we do here is to assemble. Quality assurance is also abroad. Most of the time we depend on API standards, which is good. Then what is left for Nigeria is the human resources in a valve assembly plant. Sometimes you even have foreigners in those occupying some of the positions. Procurement and installation. Typically, Nigerian companies win those tenders. So once they win the tender, the next day they're opening an LC to import. Or they import CKDs and then assemble in country. Then repairs and maintenance is also carried out in Nigeria in most cases. But in some instances, foreigners are also involved. So what we are losing in terms of value addition is that only 30% is potentially retained in country. What is the implication for that in terms of dollar loss? A typical valve has about 70% of the cost associated with production. So that means all the activities I've listed earlier, R&D, engineering design, manufacturing of components, are foreign. And then only 30% is left for Nigerian companies to manage. And where you have expatriates, it's even less than 30%. So whereas the Nigerian Content Act provides that 60% of every tender requires that 60% of the volume be sourced in country, and therefore the 60% of the value must also be retained in country. What we see is that we're able to get the 60% in terms of volume because we have some valve assembly plants, not all types of valves, but at least we have some plants. But then in terms of the real in-country value, it's less than the 60%. Only 18% is retained in country. 42% is already out. We've lost it because of the technological gap that we have elaborated earlier. So this is our situation as a country, and these are the realities that we need to address. Most of the time when we talk about local content, there are two levels of measuring local content. Contracts awarded to Nigerian companies, which is good and which is readily available. But then in terms of in-country value addition, that is where the wealth creation aspect comes in. That is where most of these funds opportunities are lost. So the conversation we're having today is what are the major bottlenecks and how do we address these bottlenecks? We've taken a case study of leading countries that actually supply valves across the world. If you know Emerson Valve, for instance, it's a United States company, but operates across the globe. We looked at their business model, and we discovered that this commits about 3% of their revenue to R&D, $439 million. But the American government also has tax incentives, which is up to 14% of our innovation tax credits. That exists for American companies that invest in R&D. What is the outcome? They operate globally, $16 billion in revenue. So you can see the nexus between investment in R&D and revenue, and also being a global player. They contribute about $500 million as tax to the government of the United States, which is good. They are creating close to 100,000 jobs. The net effect is that the American system's tax to GDP is about 26%. Same thing with Germany, where we have the KSB Germany. They also operate a similar model where they have tax credits that drive companies to invest in research, and then ultimately they get the benefits of research through revenue enhancements, global participation, employment creation, and the net effect of a very high tax to GDP ratio. In Germany is 25%. As we have heard earlier from the FIRS presentation, Nigeria is not short of tax laws. Probably what is missing is the awareness and the application. So we believe that these engagements will signpost the beginning of a new direction that will lead us to better access the tax credits that are available in our status books, but also help the companies to grow and ultimately enhance our tax to GDP ratio, which is currently about 5% or 6%, as the chairman had earlier mentioned. We're also mindful of the fact that tax incentives alone is not the ultimate. There are other imperatives for success. As NCDMB, we have aggregated these factors across 8 pillars, and we're working with stakeholders to ensure that we put the necessary levers in place. Funding, like the ES mentioned earlier, we have the $50 million R&D fund. Infrastructure, we're supporting centers of excellence, and we also have our technology incubation center. But most importantly, we're also working with industry to establish centers of excellence. The essence of centers of excellence is they are specialized centers, but most importantly, because of the provisions of the NOGIC Act that mandates the domiciliation of R&D in country, the centers have predictability in terms of the volume of research that will be carried out. But what is important is for us to ensure that those centers are up to global standard. Capability is where we ensure that the researchers in the universities have the right skill sets to not only conceptualize research, but deliver quality research of international standards that will ultimately lead to new products development or improvement to existing products. The commercial framework is also part of what we have in our radar, and that is part of the tax incentives structure that we are discussing. Beyond this workshop, we're going to have focused engagements with the support of AFIRS with our local suppliers across different sectors so that there will be a deeper understanding of the incentives, how you can apply, how you can access it, and how you can make returns in your annual tax returns. That way, we believe that we would have created a new wave of partnership between FIRS and local suppliers. So it's not just about tax collection, but making available tax incentives. So if we're able to create that momentum, we believe that the story will change. Collaboration is also very important. Governance structure. So we believe that the moment the local suppliers understand that this opportunity exists, we'll begin to see R&D strategies in most of these companies, because today it's seen as a cost center. But once you know that, oh, there's a benefit associated with tax investment, then you see it as an integral part of your strategy. Cost legal framework, how do we work with the likes of NOTAP? They're also part of this workshop to see how you can access and ensure that whatever investment you make in R&D is protected from a legal point of view. Also enforcement. Beyond creating the partnership framework with FIRS, what we intend to do, like we do in most of our projects in NCDMB, is also have a monitoring and evaluation mechanism so that periodically we'll assess the impact of this new direction. How many companies actually have R&D strategies, how many have made returns to indicate that they have invested in research, and has FIRS properly calculated that in their tax returns? What has that translated to in terms of new products? So that is the kind of mechanism that we're going to introduce in the technical team to ensure that this is not just a talk shop, but it's something that will lead to a sustainable partnership between FIRS, oil and gas industry suppliers, and NCDMB. We have high expectations from this workshop. The modules in the 3 panel sessions have been structured in a way that participants will get to understand the tax incentives for R&D in the Finance Act. We have the FIRS team that will do that. There will also be a knowledge sharing between oil and gas industry and FIRS on the triggers for enhanced revenue. We've just elaborated that investment in R&D actually generates more revenue, makes you a global player. So all that will be discussed in some of the papers. And then also the oil and gas suppliers will appreciate the nexus between investment in research and innovation and the company's long-term growth. Ultimately, what we want to see is local companies becoming global players. And we believe that once R&D becomes an integral part of your business model, the likes of Schlumberger, Halliburton are not doing anything different other than investing in research. And that is why they own most of the proprietary technology that we're using in the oil sector today. You cannot go to deep offshore operations without mentioning Halliburton, Schlumberger. It's all because of their commitment to R&D. So we want to leverage our tax laws to see how we can also develop proprietary technology through homegrown efforts. Value chain optimization, want to increase the level of production in country The case study of valves should not be our story all the time. We should change the narrative. We should begin to look backwards to see how much of in-country value, how much of production of components are we able to achieve. And that can only happen if we have an R&D culture, because you cannot have a manufacturing capability without a robust research and development ecosystem. And finally, we believe that value optimization leads to revenue growth. And ultimately, tax to GDP will grow, businesses will grow, jobs will be created, we'll have enhancements in the profile of Nigerian service companies to the extent that they begin to export some of the technology, some of the services outside Nigeria. So that is our expectations from this workshop, and I believe the quality of participants that we are seeing today will do justice to our expectations. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My GM RSSD, please don't be in a hurry to go back to your seat. Please just occupy the last seat over there. Thank you very much, sir. All right, you heard it. The expectation is that indigenous service companies will incorporate investment in R&D and also have that R&D culture as a critical component of their business models. Thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. The General Manager in charge of Research, Statistics and Development Division, NCDMB, Mr. Abdul Malik Halilu. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to beg your indulgence. Please give him another round of applause. That was a very, very informative presentation. And we've seen what the NOGIC D Act indeed has to say on R&D and the operating model that exists currently and the imperatives for success as championed and espoused by the NCDMB. Very, very quickly, because we do not really have that luxury of time, we will be moving to the first panel session that will commence right about now. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our moderator for this panel session who will be driving the conversation, Executive Chairman, Radio Circle Group, and Vice Chairman, Petan. Please join me to welcome Mr. Aranti Omoli. Round of applause for him as he takes the stage. Right here, the first seat directly behind me would just be fine. All right, it is a long list, so I'm just going to run through so that we can maximize the time that we have available. Our first panelist is representing the Petroleum Contractors Trade Section of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, PCTS of LCCI. Please make welcome Mr. Sam Ben Ohen. A round of applause for him as he joins the moderator on stage. All right, our second panelist is a senior partner, Ascension Consulting Services, and is also representing the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. Please make welcome Mr. Aziz Alatoye, FCA, FCI. A round of applause for him. It's pretty much free seating from here on, so you're most welcome, sir. It is an honor to have you with us today. Joining us on stage is a member governing council, NCDMB. He's also the chairman, Nigerian Content Consultative Forum, NCTF, Mr. Mina Oferokuma. A round of applause for him. You're most welcome, sir. It is an honor to have you with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, also joining us on this panel is the Chief Executive Officer, Cognitory Advisory. Please make welcome Mr. Temitope Togun. A round of applause for him. CEO, Cognitory Advisory, Mr. Temitope Togun. You're most welcome, sir. It is an honor to have you with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, wrapping things up on the list of panelists for the first panel session is the Principal Attorney of H.H. Kalasara and Company, Mr. Hamza Aladu Esquire. Round of applause for him as he joins them on stage. Principal Attorney H.H. Kalasara and Company, Hamza Aladu Esquire. Thank you, sir. You're most welcome. It is an honor to have you with us today. We hope to wrap this up in the shortest possible time. Thank you, sir. Mr. Moderator, let the conversation begin.
Thank you very much. And quickly, I would like to thank NCDMB for this lovely initiative. I mean, tax and tax incentives, I mean, there are things that most of us service providers or those in industries would always like to know much about. So, kudos to all the team, the GM, the director, Patrick Oba,
the GM, Abdul Malik, Obina Ofili, and then Jonathan and his team, for all the great job that they're doing. So basically, this session is a combination of the R&D, which is basically what we need to grow our industry. It's also things that we do either to improve the efficiency of our operations, look for alternative products, what can help us to actually reduce our cost of operations and our profitability. And with the ever-changing things in the business environment, it is important that strategically, for every business, we look at how to grow what we call the intrinsic values of our business, which for most people, you have it in your R&D, in your technology, in your operations, in your new products, and your turnaround, and your adaptability to the changing environment. But for us to do that, to improve the efficiency and growth in our industry, we need all the tax incentives, which we've had from the ES, we had from FRS, we had from from the GM. But the key things, tax incentives, accelerated capital allowances, giving us capital allowances alone is not enough. Accelerating is not enough. We want enhanced, maybe 150% of our capital allowances, or even our R&D expenses, 150% or 200%, so that we can have, retain more cash in our businesses. And of course, the infrastructural support from federal government, from NCDMB, the incubators, industrial parks, and leased equipment, even financing of the R&D equipment, import duty waivers on R&D equipment and materials. I mean, all these are, the great incentives. And of course, the various training on the research methodologies, as mentioned, and then the product development framework, and then tech fairs to actually encourage and build us. So, to do justice, I have the panel members from PCTS, which is the Petroleum Contractors Trade Sector, Mr. Sam Ben Owen, next to me. And then from the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, Mr. Aziz Alatoye. From NCCF, which is Nigerian Content Consultative Forum, the chairman, that is actually the private sector R&D of NCDMB, because basically they are taxed, they're into various sectoral work groups, and they are tasked to find new ways, new solutions, innovations in their various sectoral work group. So we have Mr. Amina Oforikoma, who is also a board member of NCDMB. And then from Cognitive Advisory, Mr. Temitope Togun. You're welcome. And then Mr. from HH Kalasara and Co., Mr. Hamza Alidu. And of course, our NCDMB GM Research, Mr. Abdul Malik Haliru. We will start with Mr. Amina, who has a short presentation for about maybe 6, 7, 8 minutes. Then thereafter, we'll now go through the panel sessions. We'll be able to digest his presentation after, since we already listened to Mr. Abdul Malik. Then thereafter, we go from there. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you very much, Ronti. I think they're supposed to put up a slide. That's what
Pardon?
Okay, while we wait for the slides, basically, we more or less on behalf of the Nigerian Content Consultative Forum, the Shipping and Logistics Group, to be precise, we more or less did an evaluation of what we looked at from a private sector perspective, the benefits, the impacts, and what we felt are recommendations for the introduction of certain tax incentives in the private sector, and how this would enhance economic growth in the country and also give us access to job creation opportunities. I'll just more or less read through, while we wait for the slide. So basically, as a global economy continues to evolve, we realize that businesses across various industries recognize the need to innovate and to adapt in order to remain competitive. For the marine industry, investing in technology and research and development is essential to driving growth. We obviously, sequel to the presentation by Mr. Halilu and our distinguished colleague from the FIRS, we've looked at the various reasons why tax incentives are considered extremely critical to economic growth. As a standard fiscal policy, it's a normal tool of government used to encourage companies to invest in R&D. Reduction in tax burden on companies engaged in R&D activities makes investing more financially feasible. Governments also offer tax credits or deductions for R&D expenses, or provide grants or subsidies to offset these costs. Tax incentives can also be particularly effective for SMEs that may need extra financial resources to invest, which they wouldn't otherwise have had if they didn't have this opportunity. It is also designed to promote innovation, to stimulate economic growth, and to enhance the country's competitiveness in the global marketplace. So investing in technology and R&D in the maritime sector is critical to success. Tax incentives will not only drive innovation, but will generate significant economic benefits. Now, the benefits of R&D tax incentives, as we can see, is the reduction in technology development costs. R&D tax incentives can reduce the costs associated with developing, deploying, and testing new technologies, making it more financially feasible for companies in the maritime sector of the oil and gas industry to invest in R&D. It can also enhance collaboration between companies in the sector and research institutions, universities, and other relevant stakeholders. It will also provide companies with access to new knowledge and expertise, leverage shared resources, and build partnerships to accelerate innovation and technology development. It also stimulates job creation, both in R&D and in related fields such as engineering, manufacturing, and support services. It can help also to incentivize companies to invest in these areas, which can have positive economic impacts for local communities. On the environmental impact perspective, maritime companies will be encouraged to invest in new technologies that reduce their environmental impact and improve energy efficiency, reduce emissions, and enhance waste management practices. This will also promote sustainable development in the sector in line with ESG standards. Later on, I will run through very briefly 2 case studies that will exemplify the importance of tax incentives and how this can stimulate technological development and innovation in terms of reduction in environmental impact and climate change. So, we've said to stimulate investment, drive innovation, and access to employment creation, improve profitability, attract investors, enhance competitiveness, and increase productivity. Now, in the maritime sector, globally, today, as a result of the IMO 2020 regulation, which came into force in 2020, this requires the global maritime industry to reduce sulfur emissions by over 80% by switching to low sulfur fuel. The aim of the IMO 2020 regulation is to prevent maritime pollution by ships in international waters and reduce harmful emissions that cause acid rain and diseases like asthma, stroke, lung cancer, and other pulmonary diseases. Now, R&D can provide the technology and the knowledge to develop what is called low-sulfur bunker fuel. As a result of the IMO regulations, the worldwide shipping industry, for the first time, has been faced with a major challenge. Most of the ships trading in the world today have gone through a process of installing what is called exhaust gas cleaning systems. And you'd find out that Nigeria, being the 9th largest crude oil producer in the world and the largest crude oil producer in Africa, is also the largest user of marine services in Africa. So we employ the largest amount of ships in various trades, both from the cargo side, where you have your container vessels, and into the oil and gas industry, where you have, from exploration and production, you have your mobile offshore production units, your offshore support vessels, and all the way through the value chain up till when the oil comes out of the ground, is refined and exported. Again, marine vessels come into play. So today, the only way ships can operate worldwide is access to low sulfur fuel. We are the largest producer today in Africa of what is called high pore fuel oil. And fuel oil is what is used to propel marine engines of ships. Now, with access to technology and tax incentives that could come back from the tax authorities, marine companies would be put in a position whereby they can attract investment and collaboration with foreign companies who want to invest in distillation and desulfurization processes to produce clean fuels in Nigeria that could also be an export product around the world.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mina, by expatiating more on some of the R&D requirements and innovations in the maritime sector. Thank you very much. Now, quickly, we go to the various panel discussions. The first is the PCTS. These are mostly the multinationals that have proprietary R&D technology, which they don't give out to other people. But now that Nigerian indigenous service providers are trying to develop their own R&D, so what are your advices to them, and also what financial strategy you advise them to do? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amole. Coming from PCT, which is an organization that is practically dominated by multinational services companies that are technology-based, it's clear that to have any form of competitive advantage as a supplier of services, you need to have invested a lot in R&D. You need to have a clear advantage in the competitive landscape. We listened to Mr. Halilu. We listened to the ES NCDMB outlining what we have in industry, how major companies like Amazon and Google and the rest of those companies invest as much as 5% of their budgets in R&D. It's a no-brainer. This is one of the biggest factors of growth for any company in an industry as complex and technology demanding as the oil and gas industry. Now, Nigeria is somewhat peculiar, and R&D is something that requires long-term vision, and because of that, and takes a lot of time and has a lot of uncertainty wrapped around it. And sometimes there is a lot of information asymmetry between R&D project promoters and financiers. So for Nigerian indigenous companies, it would be extremely difficult to try to undertake R&D with capital. The recommendation, therefore, is to undertake R&D with cash or grant, or depend on collaborative programs like what the NCDMB proposes, and work with the universities. I mean, some of the companies like Technip, that I know pretty much, have been established by institutions, yeah? Like the Technip was a company that was established by the French Petroleum Institute, for example. And over the years, Technip has been able to develop technologies and licenses technologies these days, and remains a front runner in oil and gas and petroleum technology today in the world. So for Nigerian indigenous companies, on top of tax incentives that will help and encourage research and innovation, Nigerian companies need to, or indigenous companies need to be able to build cash piles from where they can fund R&D, because banks are not going to fund R&D, right? Otherwise, we need to depend on, and that's something that we don't readily have in Nigeria, venture capitalists, you know, who will bring in money that they don't immediately need and are ready to take risk, you know, to fund R&D. So my advice for Nigerian indigenous companies is to try over time to accumulate the right amount of cash to begin to invest in R&D, or key into some of the programs that the NCDMB and other government agencies are promoting to launch their research and development programs, and then build from there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for that insightful contributions. And just like what you said, I mean, I'm aware that a lot of companies that are now big today, they started as small enterprises, majorly funded by the major oil-producing companies. So I'm sure, hopefully we'll have more of that in Nigeria, where there are certain initiatives and how we can tap into those R&D budgets of the E&P companies. So quickly, let's go to the next presentation by Mr. Alatoye from the Chartered Institute of Taxations. The lead presenter provided context on how various countries have used robust tax incentives, for R&D, and then how the industry benefit from such huge research, incentives. So as a tax expert, how do we bring this home and ensure that the private companies are able to utilize all these incentives, and then how it will be simplified, that they can easily utilize. I mean, not to say all the bureaucratic, capital expenditure certificate for Federal Ministry of Industry or whatever. How best do you think we can actually break it down so that people here can know that they take something home from you on how they can tap into the R&D fund. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Mr. Moderator. And let me thank the NCDMB for inviting the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. Let me go specifically to the issue that is raised. The ES actually mentioned the industry apathy to funding R&D. I would want us to focus significantly on one or two major issues. And the first one was highlighted by the lead presenter, and that is legislative provisions. There is a very huge challenge with legislative provisions on R&D. The good thing is that everyone unanimously agree that the way to go is R&D. DS said it. Our executive chairman, said it, that R&D is the way to go. That's of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. And the industry is also looking, forward to that. The moderator did mention the need for more of that R&D. But let's stay a little bit and look at the Nigerian, Oil and Gas Content Development Act, which the lead presenter did mention. Section 36 to 41 of that act provides for R&D. Sitting here, I say the good news is that there is a legislative provision. But the bad news from tax practitioner perspective is that, with utmost respect, it's difficult to make any claim under that act. Talk less of going to other acts. I said two things. The first thing is the legislative coverage. The Nigerian Oil and Gas Content Development Act is not a tax act, with utmost respect. And so a provision in that act needs to be aligned with the Federal Inland Revenue Service Act in one way or the other, or should be linked with it. I'm just flagging the challenge we have practically, in practice. Because when this issue came and the president called me and he said, you are the one that usually have problem with these tax incentives and claims, and in real life. And I would not blame the FIRS, because they just have to look at the law and apply the law. So the first thing is alignment of the legislation, where I said coverage. If you look at the upstream, for example, he did mention E&P, and you pick the PIA, and formerly, which is the PPTA. Do you find R&D there? You find it in CETA, that's right. And the chairman also did mention the issue of 10%, of your reserve revenue, reserve profits. If you look at all those coverage, it's not in the Upstream Act itself. It's not in the Federal Inland Revenue Service Act. It's not in the Constitution, but it's in CIT. So you, as an E&P company, the starting point of the argument is that it's not applicable to you by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. I said, sorry. And you said, oh, I found it in the NOC Act, which is Nigerian Oil and Gas Development Content Act. And he said, well, sorry, that's not a tax legislation. And this is a specialized, act. So we start the debate. In fact, in some cases, we get to court. There is no need for this. Now, apart from all those external challenges, let me come back to those 6 sections. No operator, with utmost respect, can successfully claim under that 6 sections. The first section is fantastic, which is section 36. It talks about the objectives of the research and development. That's fantastic, which is growth and development. But let's go to the next section of claim, directive and claim. And that's section 37. Let me read it, not in full. I'll just pick some of those things. And it says the operator shall, make expenditure to the satisfaction of the board. To the satisfaction of the board. That means, as far as FIRS is concerned, there is a need for certification of that, satisfaction of the board. So apart from coverage, the second major challenge we have is legislative drafting. All those things are under legislation. And that's, I just speak only one point which the lead presenter had, mentioned as item 8 or 7 or 8, if I'm not mistaken, under those, key critical success factors. So the legislative gap is huge because FIRS, before they can grant this expenditure, would definitely need a certificate of satisfaction from NCDMB. Do you have such a certificate? So leaving this room and saying it's going to be claimable, it's not likely going to happen. And the industry will continue to develop the apathy that the ES mentioned. Because I can't be an advisor to any operator and I tell them, you can claim under this section. The first thing I ask him, do you have a mechanism for getting the NCDMB, satisfaction letter? And they said, no, we don't have such a procedure. He said, don't let us go and be arguing with the FIRS. In fact, Mr. Lucky is going to have it very difficult because your law, assuming it's not even in FIRS Act, it's not in, PIA or the Principal Act of Taxation. Assuming I want to use your own act, the first thing it mentioned is that, yes, you can incur the expenditure. That's fine. But to the satisfaction of the board. So where is the letter that the board has given you? Now, let's move on. It says again that for the promotion, of education, watch those drafting words very carefully. For the promotion of education, attachment, training, R&D in Nigeria for the claim. So which means there are 4 things there that you must do. Because it says the beginning of that act is shall. So it's not optional. So you must have funded education. You must prove that. You must prove attachment in that cost you are claiming. You must also prove training. And you must prove R&D. These 4 must be jointly proven. What if what you have done during the year is only education or training, for example, and you charge it into your financial statement as the operator, and you file your financial statements, and FIRS picks it. They say, oh, no, this is not allowable. You said, no, it's allowable. And he said, the FIRS said, no, but the NOC Act says that there are 4 things you need to do. But you've done only one, which is training. Okay, do we have evidence of you doing this and this and this and that? So you can see we have already introduced legislative challenges. The ES mentioned one word, very important, and the FIRS chairman, unintended consequences. The drafting we have done has done an unintended consequences. I want to tell this gathering that it is extremely difficult to claim an incentive under this law, sir, with utmost respect. Okay. So, and it's the same thing with other sections, as well. Okay. So these are the things I think we need to look at. There is a solution anyway when we get there. Okay. If there is a room, because we need to get NCDMB, FIRS, and probably CITN is happy to collaborate to remove all those bottlenecks, and then we can use the infrastructure model where FIRS, Ministry of Finance, NCMD has to give an approval, and such amount that is given to the industry is going to be allowable, and they can go to sleep. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing out those critical gaps. And I guess that's the essence of these awareness sessions.
That's right.
And hopefully, NCDMB, FRS, CITA, and CITN, and the other people in the industry. We need to sit down and try to see how to harmonize all those gaps in the industry. Thank you very much. You still have a minute to give a parting shot. So,
all right. Okay.
So you can keep the good ones there. So let me quickly go to Mr. Temitope Togun, who just talked about the effectiveness of the physical incentives on the R&D and the impact on the quality of research. Maybe 3-4 minutes so that we can, go around within the allocated time. Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Question
this is
again.
better. Yes,
Effectiveness of the physical incentives, the infrastructures, and things like that, how they affect the quality of research.
Of research. When the GM was speaking, he had mentioned 2 companies, Halliburton, Schlumberger, that provide the bulk of the technology that is used. I won't be surprised if a good number of those technologies have Nigerian research behind them. Yeah. We have, our problem is not really infrastructure, so to say. It is that lack of coordination. The infrastructure is not always present in the desired level that we would want within country, but researchers are able to bridge those gaps through partnerships with researchers in other territories before they then proceed to building that capacity locally. What we find is that in the research environment, we focus heavily on publications. So that's how our researchers become professors. We've not gone into largely taking things beyond publications into patenting and licensing. And I will give you one example of where those answers are. The Petroleum Technology Development Fund sponsors Nigerians to go abroad for postgraduate degrees. The Tertiary Education Trust Fund does the same. But we don't have a process for taking the result of the research they undertake within their studies and bringing it to meet our own needs locally. PTDF scholars are not obligated to come back to Nigeria, and we find a large number of them being retained by their institutions, conducting more research, and those outcomes then go into developing technology abroad that we then pay to acquire locally. Starting point for us should be building knowledge transfer networks or partnerships. And again, in the GM's presentation, he made reference to companies' R&D plans. Those R&D plans should actually help to bridge the information asymmetry so that we can identify what they want to do. We can also look at the existing capabilities or research interests of our researchers. That way we then look at things around what infrastructure they need to meet those gaps, the ones that are available locally, the ones they need partnerships for. Anything they want to do, there's somebody somewhere, maybe Malaysia, maybe Norway, maybe Brazil, who is working on the same thing or who has done it. And it's when we evolve those partnerships that we can tap and address the infrastructural problems. So for me, it's more a question of coordination and bringing the expertise available, matching the research interest with the identified gaps and needs that are contained in those R&D plans of companies.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, the key take home from that is more of coordination of our various research funding, research institutes, our training strategies, and ensuring that the people we're training, the work they are doing are towards specific harmonized purpose. Thank you very much, greatly appreciated. Now to Mr. Amzad Alidu, we've been talking about research, our findings, our development, for commercialization. How do we handle the intellectual property part of it, to ensure that most of these findings are protected?
Yes, thank you very much. So when you asked this question, you remind me a case. There is one Mr. Oladipo. In 1963, he published an article titled "When the Lagoon Caught Fire." It was published. So in 1977, the Nigerian Daily Times reproduced the article verbatim. Mr. Oladipo felt that his right was infringed. He sued the Daily Times, claims for damages, and at the end of the day, he succeeded. So the investors and the inventors shall fear nothing. There are laws put in place to give them an adequate protection. For more than 400 years ago, that laws were in existence because the developing countries are aware of the importance and the significance of R&D. So they have not left the baby of R&D unprotected. In 1623, in England, the first law was enacted. It was termed Statute of Monopoly. This law, Statute of Monopoly, was also applicable here in Nigeria. It encouraged people and investors to invest in R&D with a view to have a new technology. It is without doubt that countries that put more resources in R&D have the highest GDP. So this law of 1623 made various changes up to 1900. And in 1902, the first indigenous law was enacted. It was called Patent Proclamation Ordinance of 1902. This law gave protection for the investors, inventors, and the invention itself. Up to the time when 3 laws were enacted, all with a view to give protection to the baby of R&D. The Patent and the Design Act was enacted. The Trademarks Act was also enacted, and Patent and Design Act, Trademarks, and Copyright Acts. These are the leading law. Apart from it, we can find a provision under some laws that directly deals with the issue of patent. For instance, under Civil Aviation Act, Section 52, deals with patent. Under Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Act, specifically Section 64, deals with patent.
Okay.
When we take, for instance, Section 1 of the Copyright Act, under these sections, works that are eligible for copyright are listed there, about 6.
So, Mr. Alidu, I will give you your final 1 minute, so I won't give you any extra more. So, I can use that to conclude.
So, if I can summarize, the investors shall fear nothing. There are laws put in place to protect their interests. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm sure next time they need to give us 90 minutes because there's so much content that we need to listen and understand. So they should know that. Now, for us to round up, what we do is I'll start with Mina. And we'll just take 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. And then Mr. Alilu, after listening to all the extras, will come up with the action plan as for his 2, 3, 4 minutes round up. Thank you. Mina?
Okay. My point of view, more or less, is that in summary, technological corporations with ideas born out of innovation have an extremely long gestation period. And I believe the ultimate objective for all of us in this room, from various and for Nigeria as a country, is first of all to stimulate investment with an ultimate objective of enhancing economic growth. Now, bottom line here is, for us to do this, we can't do it on our own. We would need to attract a lot of foreign investment, collaboration, and cooperation to bring in those kind of technologies that are required for us to produce certain products and commodities of extremely high value that also can be exported out of Nigeria and would improve our GDP at the end of the day. Now, to do this, the tax authorities do have a great obligation to encourage and incentivize such investments. And I believe that that can only be done by employing the kind of tax incentives that a lot of our colleagues have seen in the displays and the presentations that have been made today are obtainable in other climes around the world. So for instance, there's certain technological investments, like I said earlier, that have long gestation periods that would need to have tax holidays for a specified period of time. So for instance, I'm making an investment where I know my gestation period is more or less 5 years. It's important that I have the minimum advantages or the maximum advantages on the tax side to be able to stimulate what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Bottom line here is that the success of that enterprise at the end of the day will be greater revenue and obviously more tax income for the state.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. I think it would be nice they share your slides because I saw some of what you put in there. Mr. Tuk, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. So I think my takeoff point would be what the CITN representative mentioned, and that they need to address all those gaps. That can help us to kickstart the process. Second issue for me would be the research and development plans that operators are expected or required to be submitting. That plan should feed the research focus of our researchers so that we can begin to align what they are working on with what industry has said it requires. Third for me would be tax incentives won't be enough. It's a very risky process, and I think that point had been made. We do not yet in Nigeria have a provision for de-risking the development of technology. We call something the technology readiness level. Most developments stop at prototyping stage, and it's the valley of death to cross between prototype and market readiness. The process of de-risking that is something that at NCDMB we have to look at. It is also one of the reasons for apathy, and it's a stage that comes before venture capital eventually kicks in to commercialize. The last thing I would like to mention would be the need to also build capacity within the research community, academic entrepreneurship, so that the awareness that they too can make money from licensing when they go beyond publications.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. For our tax experts, in some of your parting shots, what role can the excess withholding tax hold to the service providers carried in perpetuity be utilized in R&D funding?
Very well. I absolutely agree with that. But let me say there are two things as a parting shot. The first thing is actually to come up with a model that will make it sustainable, that FRS is going to accept, Ministry of Finance is going to accept, the Department even for Incentive, which is NIPC, also probably if there is needs to be involved. And let us look at the model of the road infrastructure tax credits. If we apply it to what we are discussing today, I have the honest belief it's going to work. Because the Ministry of Road is involved, the Ministry of Finance is involved, and the Federal Inland Revenue Service is involved. FIRS is then going to issue a certificate to you, based on the road plan and the amount you are going to spend. So when you charge it into your financial statement, and immediately they see it, they check the certificate they issue, then it's allowable. All the grammars we have blown in the law with intended or unintended consequences is then going to be allowed by the FRS. Then the industry then will have confidence in it. Lastly, I want to say that there is a quotation in tax law that we need to pay attention to, and that started in 1923 in the Cape Brandy case, where the judge, Rowlatt J., says that in the Taxing Act, one has to merely look at what is clearly said. There is no room for intendment. There is no equity about tax. There is no presumption about tax. Nothing is to be read in, nothing is to be implied. So therefore, we must be very clear about what we want to do and make sure it's sustainable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I mean, for those precise points. PCTS, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that PCTS companies like Schlumberger and Baker Hughes, Technip FMC, Halliburton, they have over 60 years of history. And they all started as small unicorns. GM, I want to say that we need unicorns in the oil and gas industry. Unicorns are risk takers. They come with novel ideas that venture capitalists find attractive. And they have no qualms with failing. So they take the risk. If you look for companies that have had 5 years of maturity, they are established in certain lines of businesses already. No one of those want to take the risk that is involved in real R&D that will generate the kind of innovation that is transformative. And that's what we really need.
Okay, thank you
very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now for Mr. Alilu to round up. 2 minutes, and it could be 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very insightful panel session, and very pleased with the quality of panelists that we have here, because they've done justice to the topic. They've given us new insights and areas to focus on. So I like the fact that we can actually work with FIRS, Ministry of Finance, NIPC, to actually develop the framework that will enable us to push this agenda forward in terms of the execution imperatives. So that is well taken, and we intend to push that agenda. I also like the fact that beyond the omnibus provisions in the Finance Act and also in the NOGIC Act, there's a need for us to sit down with the different sectors to understand their R&D needs and then construct the incentive program around those deliverables such that the incentives will speak to specific outcomes in terms of what does that translate to in terms of product development, process improvement, and wealth creation. So that is a very good feedback, and I think the team that will develop the framework will take that into account. We're happy that it has been revalidated that Nigeria is not short of intellectual property laws. What is just required is enforcement, and that has been part of the implementation imperatives that we have also identified. Then I also see that there's a lot of discussion around alignment of the NOGIC Act with the Finance Act, such that the incentive to spend on R&D resonates with what the Finance Act provides for. So we intend to also look at that element to ensure that there's an alignment. I heard things like, can we even give certification for R&D spend, which means we have to define the parameters for success. And it is on the basis of defining the parameters of success and achieving those success elements that FIRS will now say, okay, this is qualified for tax incentive. So we've taken that, and it will be part of what we're going to construct. So thank you all for this very positive feedback, and we appreciate the contributions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll just take 2 questions from the audience. There's somebody there. Whisk give them the mic, please. Okay, and there's a lady in front. That's okay. And then there's someone just next one here.
Okay, good day, everybody. My question is this. Should the realization or the acceptance that R&D has taken place be success? Because R&D does not always lead to success. How do we marry that? Because sometimes you risk and it doesn't lead somewhere successful. It only shows you this way is not successful. Try something else. So how do we reconcile that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kolere. I work at Kolere from the Raw Materials Research and Development Council. The mandate for local content development in manufacturing industry is vested on the Raw Material Research and Development Council. To that extent, to allay the fears raised by the CITN representative, the RMRDC has developed a framework along with NIPC, FIRS, Ministry of Finance, and NOTAP, on all other relevant agencies in the development of a framework and development of guidelines. So these guidelines he was talking about, that letter of recommendation has been approved for implementation through the Executive Order number 5 that mandated RMRDC to verify all R&Ds eligible for that tax. So it has been provided for in the Executive Order 5 for the manufacturing industry. What I will advise is the board probably will liaise with RMRDC while developing their own framework, since their own is concerned with the oil and gas sector. But we have already done that, and we're even planning for a workshop for the manufacturing sector. Because initially when we developed it, we called the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria and made the presentation to them. That was the first thing they brought, the first question. How do you operationalize it? So we had to go back and work with the FIRS and the Ministry of Finance and did a letter to the Ministry of Finance that sent it to the chairman of the FIRS for advice. A letter, they accepted it and okayed it. Now it's operational.
Okay.
Now we are planning to do another workshop to inform them that this is now okay with them.
Okay, yeah, I mean, thank you very much. And I think the GM will ensure that they try to see how to close that gap and take an advantage. Yeah.
If I am allowed, I need to encourage my brother to please get whatever you have into a finance act, because executive order is not a legislation. And these are the things that drag people to court. Because somebody will look at the executive order, and FIRS staff will say, sorry, but this is another. Tax is about legislation. And that is why I have to read that. It has to be approved by the National Assembly. So all that you have done is very fine, but try to complete, the process. Yes. So when you are putting those things together that has to do with tax, if you involve CITN, we will give you an advice from practice to eliminate area of disagreement between intergovernmental agencies as well as the industry and the government. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the, that's quick one.
Okay. So time lag is one of the challenges of financing for R&D. Because when you're starting your R&D program or initiative, you're not sure about the end goal, and you're not sure really about when you will round it up. Mm-hmm. So the initiation of an R&D program does not in of itself qualify as an innovation. It's not. It's just an activity, And this is why in most companies, R&D is continuous. You never shut down on R&D. It gets going year in, year out, and that's why in most of these companies, like the PCT companies, R&D is a feature in the budget every year. Okay. And there is always a log of so many failed R&D initiatives.
Thank you very much. For me, my take home to Lagos, 2 things. The first one is the harmonization of the R&D focus in the industry vis-a-vis the EMP and service companies' budgets and programs, so that we can look at the gaps in the industries, look at the high-cost drivers, and then try to see how we can harmonize the various parts of the industries to focus on those areas. That way, we can easily see the progress and the successes as we go on. And the second one is the harmonization of the PIA, the CETA, the NOGIC Act, and the various NIPC, so that we can make them accessible, all these incentives and whatever, to the industry. The truth is, it is cumbersome, it's difficult, it's challenging for us to be able to utilize it. But if we take those two as some of our low-hanging fruits that we're taking from this session and we'll work on them, I'm sure we'll go to somewhere. So thank you very much, all the panel members, and also thank you for the audience for listening to us, and I hope you've also taken a couple of things home as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Very, very interesting and insightful panel discussion, and yes, with the quality and caliber of panelists on this panel, I'm sure that, yes, it has been a very, very Herculean task to manage the time effectively. We will now have a group photograph, so all our panelists, please just bunch up together in the middle of the stage. Paparazzi, that is your cue. We will have a group photograph right about now. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you very much. Immediately after now, we will proceed on that tea break. Paparazzi, please coordinate them as appropriate. Immediately after this session, we will proceed on a tea break. Now, if you step out of the hall through any of the exits in the midsection of the hall, whether on the right or on the left, you'd move to the left and the right wings where tea will be served. All our invited guests will proceed for the tea break first. That's the arrangements that we will have. Ladies and gentlemen, a final round of applause for all our panelists as they go back to their seats. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. All right, so we will proceed on that tea break, and when we come back, it will be to continue with the second panel session. But of course, before then, there will be the lead presentation. So just before we have that tea break, we have a very, very short video that will be beamed on the screen right about now. Media team, over to you for our video just before we proceed for the tea break.
Oil and gas sector is undergoing a major transformation thanks to the adoption of digital technologies.
Volume.
Compared to other sectors, where companies have apparently embraced the technology and information revolution, oil and gas are somewhat slower. This means technological solutions have great potential for improving communication and addressing the sector's unique environmental challenges. Any oil and gas company that makes effective use of the power of digital transformation can gain a significant competitive advantage over competitors. In this video, we are going to explore technology transformation in the oil and gas industry. To say the oil and gas industry is unlike any other industry would be a vast understatement. There are some unique challenges in the industry that lend to the slow adoption of technology and innovation. For example, imagine an oil and gas supply chain. In short, we can summarize something like exploration. This is where the team finds the best place to drill and intricately surveys the site. Next, production. The oil or gas is extracted from the earth. Now, refining. Crude materials are refined into consumer energy products. Next, marketing. The product is advertised. Finally, it's us, consumers. Each link has its own set of needs and issues that must be addressed if it's to function properly. Another unique challenge is the size of the infrastructure. The infrastructure needed in each part of the supply chain is larger. From drilling rigs to pipelines, distribution networks, compression, and metering stations to storage facilities, every aspect requires infrastructure that is enormous in terms of cost and size. Another unique challenge is safety and compliance. As one of the most regulated industries in the world, oil and gas companies have to worry about safety and compliance issues more than the average business. If there's an accident and proper precautions and guidelines weren't followed, there will be repercussions from governments and consumers. Fortunately, recent technological improvements make overcoming these challenges possible. First, let's look at automation. Robotics and other automated technologies are at a point where they can do risky work better than humans. For example, automated drilling can reduce overhead costs, increase employee safety, and make drilling more efficient in smaller locations. There is a great innovation in logistics. Each part of the supply chain has shortcomings that can be addressed. One company has developed a platform that streamlines extraction with an automatic injection system to prevent hydration. Other studies suggest that the use of metal organic structures can alter oil and gas transportation by eliminating the need to emit harmful materials during travel. This type of logistics improvement will streamline the entire supply chain. Another technology advancement we can see is in the fleet management solutions. Tracking staff and equipment was never easy. GPS tracking can now collect and view important data almost instantly, even in the most remote locations. The company can actually know where all its expensive equipment is and can be warned if something is wrong. Next is the Internet of Things integration. Connected machines mean you always have the latest information. This will help oil and gas companies anticipate equipment failures and reduce overall downtime. The pump housing can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost productivity, so if the status of the pumps is known in real time, replacements can be prepared for what is considered prone to failure. This type of real-time data can help the management team make better and more informed decisions. Finally, the oil and gas sector is just starting to catch up with cloud computing. The integration of IoT with cloud computing makes sense for those who need real-time data analysis. All IoT sensors have surprising amounts of data that require significant computing power for calculation and analysis. Cloud computing means that there is a large amount of computing power available that requires a large investment in your own infrastructure. In today's energy market, oil and gas companies need to make sure they do everything they can to protect the environment. Cloud computing offers ways to achieve this. Private data servers typically operate with 10% to 20% efficiency, while virtual machines in the cloud can operate with up to 80%. Computers on networks use the same amount of energy regardless of efficiency, and this means that cloud computing can perform the same amount of computing with a fraction of energy. The oil and gas sector uses these innovations and trends to increase operational efficiency and worker safety while reducing costs. Drone control and predictive maintenance are now easier to control offshore platforms and landing facilities. In addition, digital twins bridge the gap between physical and virtual spaces and allow remote engineers to manage real estate. The adoption of these new technologies will help oil and gas operators and companies face evolving challenges and move forward.
So, ladies and gentlemen, in the next 10 minutes, we will converge in the hall because that will signal the end of the tea break. In the next 10-15 minutes, we'll be back in the hall to continue with the proceedings for today. So by my wristwatch, we should be back in here by 1:05. That is in the next 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the tea break. Sir. Don't forget, as you step out of the hall, please remember to leave with your personal possessions. Thank you very much. That'll help us to reduce the incidence of misplaced items. Thank you. All right, if you've had your tea, please, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, if you've had your tea, please come back inside the main hall so we can continue with the proceedings for today. We still have a lot of work before us. We have 2 panel sessions. We also have 2 presentations. And remember, as in the mode of the first session, there will be a panel session after each presentation. So we still have 2 of each before we call it a day. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, please let us come back inside the main hall so we can continue with the proceedings. Remember, we have 2 panel sessions to go. We also have 2 presentations. And once we're done with those presentations and panel discussions, we will be able to say that, yes, we've done a great job for today. Thank you. So please, let's proceed into the main hall. Let's converge in the main hall so we can continue with the proceedings for today. Thank you. For the second presentation, we have royalty potential from R&D investment. And yes, our lead presenter is ready and raring to go. Once we're done with that second presentation, we'll move straight to the panel session. I've been advised that, yes, we have the full complement of the panel, so we will be moving straight to that activity once we're done with the second presentation. This is the final call. Wherever you are, please come back inside the hall so we can continue with the proceedings for today. Thank you very much. It promises to be a very, very long day, and it is very important that we maximize the time that we have available so we can make short work of all the activities that have been lined up for the rest of today's proceedings. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just before I call the second lead presenter, I've been advised that the chairman of the Rivers State Internal Revenue Service, Mr. Chibuzo Aholu, is represented by Dr. Belema Emmanuel. Dr. Belema Emmanuel, round of applause for him. Thank you, sir. He's also represented by Mr. Manson Henry Ndebo. Thank you very much. Our duo from the Rivers State Internal Revenue Service. Thank you. We trust that we bring glad tidings from the chairman, Rivers State Internal Revenue Service, Mr. Chibuzo Aholu. Thank you very much for being here today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's settle down. Let's settle down so we can continue with the proceedings for today. We really do not have the luxury of time. Our second presentation is entitled Royalty Potential from R&D Investment. And yes, our speaker is ready and raring to go. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our second lead presenter for this Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Suppliers Tax Awareness Workshop 2023, hosted by NCDMB and FIRS. Ladies and gentlemen, he is Associate Director, Tax Line of Service at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Please make welcome Mr. Ayo Akinduite, FCA. Round of applause for him as he takes the stage. Mr. Ayo Akinduite, FCA, Associate Director, Tax Line of Service, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. To be on the screen.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I could stand on all existing protocols and just go straight on with the presentation. So, of course, the background has been laid with some of the earlier presentations with respect to the importance of R&D, particularly to the oil and gas industry. Maybe I'll start off with, a story around exploration. So usually when we talk about research and development, the focus is always around what's happening in the lab. I recall an incident that happened, I think, in Gabon, where an indigenous, an African, a traditional practitioner, say he has a way of carrying out exploration, without doing seismic and all that. And with the approach that he established, he was able to predict, out of 3 predictions in terms of where to drill a well, he was successful in 2 of the 3 options, that he gave. So So clearly our R&D has been with us for a long time, and is not only in the laboratory. And each and every one of us, I expect that we have a role to play. So providing a bit of overview and some synopsis, I think I'll just move on to the agenda. So we start off with R&D in the Nigerian oil and gas space. We have a quick overview. We have an outlook on the royalty flows in and out of Nigeria. Then we look at the global perspectives, how are other countries doing it. In the previous paper, so we saw a few examples there, so we just have add one or two additional examples to that. Then we'll delve into a pathway to increased R&D in Nigeria and the associated benefits to that. What are the role of stakeholders, and also during the panel discussion, so that was highlighted as one of the key success factors, collaboration among and between various agencies, between countries and various stakeholders in that space. Then we'll round up with the next steps, and hopefully we'll be able to take maybe one or two questions because of time. So let's start off with R&D in Nigeria. So this gives a bit of an overview, shows how significant the oil and gas industry is to the Nigerian economy. It contributes about 60% of government revenue and about 90% of total revenue. And the graph there highlights the contribution to GDP, which is relatively small, considering the significance of the industry. As at 2022, just slightly over 6% of GDP was coming from the oil and gas industry. And you could see the trend. It seems to reflect the oil production also. In 2021, production fell to as low as about just slightly over 1 million barrels per day. But of course, R&D can play a very important role to grow that basket, and achieve and get us back to the glory days where Nigeria was conveniently producing over 2 million barrels per day. And I think we're on our way to that recovery. Recent data shows that production is now about 1.7 million barrels a day. And clearly we can do more. So providing a bit of historical perspective, so R&D is not a new concept. And in the panel discussion earlier, we saw the legal development from the 1800s. But in Nigeria, we could say that the first reference to research was sometimes in 1940. Of course, there might have been some developments around that before then, and we saw how things then evolved, 1960, 1973, 1977, to where we are in 2021, where the Nigerian Content Research and Development Fund was established, and we expect that this would have very significant impact on how we move forward in the R&D space. Of course, funding was considered to be one of the critical challenges, and hopefully these would help to unlock value in that space. So looking at it from the Nigerian oil and gas perspective, Nigeria ranked 118th out of 132 countries from innovation, input and output point of view, because we spend less than 1% of our budget on R&D, and just about 0.2% of our GDP is spent on R&D. And the question is, what are the key issues? And some of these were not exactly new. Inadequate funding, we saw that in the previous paper presentation. because it's understood that we require long-term funding for R&D. So that's a key challenge. Inaccessibility to data and information, that's also another challenge. We are not very good with respect to managing data. So even events that's happened, we haven't done a good job of preserving and keeping them in such a way they are readily accessible. Then inadequate technological equipment and infrastructural management, even though from the last conversation, we could say that maybe lack of infrastructure may not be the major challenge, but clearly is one of the issues that have limited or hindered the progress that we could have achieved in the area of research and development, and of course, lack of collaboration between stakeholders. So we're going back to that issue again. Clearly, we need to work together to be able to achieve the desired objective. And a clear example was how FRS and NCDMB could work together to address issues around tax deductibility of R&D expenditure. Ineffective educational system. Our educational system are meant to be the nucleus, are meant to be the center of excellence, they are meant to be the places where some of these innovative ideas emanate from, and we really haven't managed that process well enough as a country. So in summary, we could say that these 5 items are a reflection of some of the challenges that have faced R&D in Nigeria. So R&D is of great importance to the oil and gas industry, and I think that is that has been established, and that was highlighted in the previous conversation also, that countries that are making significant progress, particularly from a GDP point of view, we could see that they are making a lot of progress in the area of research and development. And a couple of initiatives are now being put in place to address some of the shortcomings that we have seen in Nigeria. One is the establishment of the Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Content Development Act, which I think is a step in the right direction. The Nigerian Oil and Gas Research and Development Regulation of 2021. I know in the previous panel conversation there were discussions around policies and regulations and laws that we need to put in place. So I think this is also a development in the right direction, but we clearly need to do more. The 10-year R&D roadmap, which the Executive Secretary also did mention during his opening remarks. So that's an initiative that can help to address some of the funding challenges that we've seen in this space. And the launch of the 50 million Nigerian Content Research and Development Fund. So, and despite these measures, the domestic oil and gas sector remains fragile, and the oil and gas sector scored only 53 out of a possible 100 in the Resource Governance Index. And if you look at the threshold compared with other players in this industry, that is considered to be in the weak performance band. And I'm hopeful that after this conversation, at the end of this workshop, then we're then able to move in the right trajectory and significantly improve the performance of Nigeria in this space. So let's have a look at the outlook of royalty inflows and outflow out of Nigeria. But generally, as a country, we really have not done well in terms of royalty flows. Royalty is the reward that you receive when you have done well, when you have achieved some major landmark from a research and development point of view. So companies in the oil and gas industries who invest significantly in R&D have the opportunity of generating additional income from royalties on the usage of products of patented or patents developed. So over and above the revenue that you make from your core activities, you can then be able to position yourself to take advantage of the patents and some of the breakthrough R&D outcome of those R&D efforts. So in terms of generating additional revenue, the government also would benefit because as you generate additional revenue and those income, those profits are not exempted from taxes, then government is able to earn additional tax arising from those royalty payments. So this is considered a win-win situation for all parties. So if you get the strategy right, both the private sector players and government could benefit from this approach. So as an example, Baker Hughes, that happens to be one of the key players in the service sector, spends about 550 million per annum on R&D, and same thing with Schlumberger. And in the earlier conversation, these are names that come, from time to time because they have a number of patents, and these has put them in very strategic position in the oil and gas service space. So we sincerely hope in the next couple of years that we'll have Nigerian companies, that would have been able to move into such an enviable position, with respect to the outcome of those investments. So let's have a closer look at the global perspective. How does Nigeria stand with respect to a few countries? So if you look at R&D as a percentage of GDP in a number of countries, so let's start with Nigeria. So Nigeria, we're right there in the middle. And from a GDP point of view, R&D spend is only 0.13% of our GDP, so clearly less than 1%. So if you compare ourselves to Egypt, Egypt is about 1% of GDP. Saudi Arabia is about 0.5% of GDP. And those that could be considered to be gold plates, countries that are performing exceptionally well. And of course, if we look at countries where many of the key players in the oil and gas industries are coming from, you see that we have quite a number of them from Norway, with 2.3% of GDP, and the US with almost 3.4% of GDP spend. So clearly, there's a need for us to step up inflow, finance, investment into R&D in Nigeria. And it's understandable when practitioners say that the key challenge with R&D in Nigeria is financing, because the funds are not there. And with some of the initiatives being brought forward by NCDMB, we expect that this will be an issue that we're able to address in the near term. So let's have a closer look at what a country like Norway, what they've been able to do. In Norway, its local content development has been largely driven by a national focus on research and development and technology transfer. So when they're talking about local content, two key areas they focus on is R&D and technology transfer. Of course, they started exploration at about mid-1960s, about the same time when we also go into that space in Nigeria. And because of the focus on policies to protect interests of communities and the economy, that has helped them to achieve some significant progress in the area of R&D. This local content strategy has been held up as an example of good practice for that country. So clearly, there are a few things that we can learn from Norway. The focus has been one on collaboration, and incidentally, that's one of the areas that we say we need to improve as a country. Foreign operators are strongly encouraged to collaborate with Norwegian companies by forming R&D partnerships and joint development programs. So that collaboration is there between industry players. Government policies on local content requirements. The government has local content policies for local and international oil companies, and these include commitment to technology transfer and local content plan. And that's one of the things that NCDMB is requesting operators in the industry to begin to practice. So that's something that Norway seems to have done very well, commitment on technology transfer. So it's not just enough for you to come and operate in this country. You should also have some kind of framework where you're able to transfer technology to local and indigenous companies in the country. Norwegian oil and gas supply companies are also required to develop advanced technologies. Okay, so it's not just enough that IOCs, international oil companies, come and share and do some form of knowledge transfers. Even local players, indigenous players are also encouraged to have investment into oil and gas and be able to come up with advanced technologies to drive and improve development in the oil and gas space. So let's have a look at some of the examples or learnings from the US. Of course, US is one of the largest producers. So two key areas of focus from an R&D point of view is the issue of tax credits. So of course, this we provided up to 20 years carry forward, where if you incur R&D expenditure, you are allowed to carry it forward up to 20 years until it was fully utilized for tax purposes. Tax credits is not a new framework in Nigeria. For example, if you look at the 1993 PSCs, which was basically the flagship PSC arrangement in Nigeria, there's a provision of 50% investment tax credits, basically saying for every $100 investment that you make in that sector, you get a tax credit of 50% of that, which is $50. So effectively, the incentive is that if you invest $100, you get your $100 back as capital allowances. Then on top of that, you then get a 50%. So you are getting 150% of every investment that you make. Of course, that was considered to be generous. But with the benefit of hindsight, and particularly when as a country, we were struggling with production. Production at the point was less than $1 million. But those productions were mainly from the key PSC assets, Bunga of Shell, Abu of Ajib, Egina of Total, Era of ExxonMobil, Chevron. So those are really the assets that were supporting Nigeria. And for me, I think that seems to be a good investment. So if we're able to transfer or replicate this approach in the R&D space, there's a chance that we will achieve some reasonable level of success. Another example in this space is the NLNG. Of course, there have been conversations around, is the 10-year tax holiday relevant? Is it useful? But for me, I think it was a good investment because it made the NLNG possible, and today, that's also one of the best performing assets in Nigeria. So if we're able to give and make investment in R&D on the side of government by saying we're willing to give you generous tax credits or reasonably long period tax holidays, then that may encourage the kind of investment that I would like to see in R&D. And we've seen a country like US make use of that tool very well. So funding is also another area where US has done very well, where government provides federal funding to support R&D activities. At the last panel session, I think it was clearly stated that shareholders are not likely to use their capital to fund R&D activities. Maybe at best, if they have made significant profits, they can make a percentage of that profit available for R&D. But it's very unlikely that they will risk their capital for R&D. Then how can we then address the issue of funding? Government providing the seed capital to de-risk and also be able to fund that can be a great opportunity. And we can see US taking advantage or leading that. So no wonder that they were, in terms of funding, as a percentage of GDP, is almost 3.4% relative to Nigeria, that is far less than 0.2%. So Saudi Arabia is also another good example. Also had some great initiatives around funding, providing about $80 billion for R&D to deepen local content development, and also the issue of collaboration. So the last is Egypt, which, so we could have said that all the other countries are European countries, that have made significant strides, or North American country. But Egypt is an African country, and they are also able to make some improvements. So they put in place in their own production sharing agreements, it was clearly stated that as an operator in that space, you have an obligation, towards local, giving priority to local contractors and subcontractors, and that will create an opportunity for technology transfer. Now, what's the pathway to increase research and development in the Nigerian space? I think it's something that we all agreed on, that if we're able to get the investment into R&D, the reward that will come out of it in terms of royalties that will come from the use of those landmark breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, and patents will result in royalty revenue. So clearly, if we're able to achieve this, there will be a reward for the private sector players, and government, in a way, will also benefit in terms of improved tax revenue. So I'll just go through these 5 items very quickly. Some of them have been mentioned before, but clearly, I believe if we're able to address and be able to address some of the issues with respect to these 5 areas, they would have positioned Nigeria to play a key role in the R&D space. The first one is funding. And of course, I don't need to overflog that. There's need to increase R&D funds that is available for players in this space. Increased collaboration. So I think between government agencies, that was clearly stated during the panel conversation. But we need to take it beyond that. We need to have clear-cut collaboration between key stakeholders in this space. This will include research centers and the academia. We include product developers. We include the oil and gas producing companies. Why are the oil and gas producing companies important here? Even when you have an idea, you need an environment where you can prove the concept, where you can demonstrate that it is indeed working and is going to add value to the bottom line. So that partnership, that relationship with the oil and gas industry players is very important. Also the service companies and the financiers, the people that provide the funding, which could be government or it could be grants from other players. Tax incentives. So I think this was also very well highlighted in the previous session. So we need to provide sufficient incentive for investment to be attracted to that, to this very important sector. So R&D, and this could be in form of tax deductibility, having clarity around tax deductibility. I know I talked about the tax credits enjoyed by the 1993 PSC. But because of lack of clarity, there was almost like an industry dispute that started in maybe like 2007 or so. I was not resolved until more than 10 years after. You can imagine the kind of resources that is involved, legal fees and all that. Why? Because there was lack of clarity. So clearly, we need to address this, such that the incentives you are having, the incentives that you are to enjoy does not create other challenges in the near future. You don't have to have long conversation. And from the previous session, I think a simple solution was proposed, and hopefully we're able to find a way to implement that. So tax incentives could be in terms of being able to enjoy tax deductibility on donations to R&D related activities. Of course, this also could be in form of low-cost loans, for the purpose of driving R&D activities, and of course, infrastructure. We need to have the right level of infrastructure. I recall at the hotel where I stayed yesterday, the hotelier was responsible for generating power. I saw the water treatment plants. So these are basic infrastructure that other people take for granted in other economies. For R&D to work, we must get our infrastructure right. So it's not just about the research centers alone, but also the supporting infrastructure to make it work. We need to find a way to make that happen. So what are the key benefits to various stakeholders who have increased royalty income to the oil and gas companies, increased production? So if you have better technology, a few years ago, the franking system of producing oil and gas in the US was a technology that was difficult to make to happen. But because of innovation, today, US is one of the leading producers of oil and gas in the world. So clearly, R&D can help to improve and be able to produce hard-to-reach petroleum reserves. Increased economic growth and improvement in our GDP, technology transfer, skills acquisition, and of course, improvement in the standard of living of the people. So it looks like I'm almost out of time. How many minutes do I have? 5, okay. Okay, so I think I can run through the rest of the slides. So looking a little bit more about the collaboration. So I think we can't say too much about collaboration because it's really in the center of all that needed to happen in that space. So we need to have collaboration between oil and gas companies, the research centers, government agencies, and financiers of research. So, and the government agencies, I know it's good that we mentioned the tax authority and NCDMB, but I think we also need to bring in the industry regulators here, so that they will not be putting out regulations that would hinder the progress that should ordinarily be made in the R&D space. So it's important to be able to get all key stakeholders, to work together to be able to deliver on this very important mandate of getting R&D to work in Nigeria. So the role of key stakeholders, you have those that sponsor research. So it's not necessary that it must be only one person. So it could be a shared approach where you have a couple of agencies that are coming together to sponsor R&D activities. This ensures that you have diversity of views, but more importantly, you have the funding to take it from initiation to commercialization. But what is important, so that you don't have strange bedfellows coming together, is to have some level of alignment and clarity on the objective of each of the party that is coming on board, for the purpose of that research initiative. So it's possible that people may have different objectives for getting involved. For example, a private sector player may be looking at it purely from a commercial point of view. The academia may be looking at it from the point of making a landmark, technological breakthrough. So it may not be that they are mutually exclusive, but it's just important that everybody knows why we are on the table so that it's easy to work together to achieve the desired objective. knowledge transfer, I think this is also extremely important. So that we're not duplicating efforts. We're in a world where technology has made it indeed a global village. So when putting together our R&D plan, I think it's good practice to check what is happening in other places. So we're not duplicating efforts, we're not repeating what others have done and maybe they've achieved some level of breakthrough. Rather, what we should be focusing on is how can we get incremental knowledge? You know, some research has been done up to a certain point, so can I take it from there and then take it to the next level? Then having some kind of licensing arrangement, you know, so we shouldn't say because I fund the R&D activity, the deliverable, the outcome of it. Can you optimize it by licensing it to other players in the industry? You know, I think during the short break we were talking about the influence that Nigerian oil and gas players can have in the sub-region, just the way our banking sector is having that. So if you compare Nigeria to maybe Ghana, to Sao Tome, and many of the other African countries around us, we seem to have a more advanced oil and gas practice. Can we leverage on licensing to be able to optimize the values and opportunities that come out of our R&D efforts? So in terms of next steps, so we just put this framework together, which is basically first to identify measures already set in place by organizations like NCDMB and other relevant stakeholders. Then develop plan to initiate measures that are yet to be in place. So it's not unlikely that we have not covered all the things that we needed to cover. So we could take a step backward and have another look at what we have done. Are there areas of improvement? Are there additional things that were in our blind sight? Then it's important to then have a form of consensus with all the relevant stakeholders. So there's need to have that engagement. Then begin to take action, then have a way to measure and do some kind of monitoring and evaluation. So there's a common saying that what is not measured don't get done. So we need to have a framework where it's not just about throwing money at an issue or a challenge, where we are making the investment deliberately, then we're also able to measure the kind of impact that is being made. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ayo Akinduite, FCA, Associate Director, Tax Line of Service, PwC, our lead presenter number 2. Please proceed to that seat over there. Thank you, sir. That was a most insightful and illuminating presentation. He has indeed shared with us an enormous amount of information and knowledge in that presentation. We've seen R&D models that work in different countries, and we've seen the applicable lessons that we can obviously put into practice right here in our industry in Nigeria. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, allow me to beg your indulgence. Please give him another round of applause. Thank you very much, sir, for that presentation. Mr. Ayo Akinduite, FCA, Associate Director, Tax Line of Service, PwC. Moving very, very quickly, we will commence the second panel session right away. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our moderator who will be driving the conversation for this second panel session. He's the Head of Department, Petroleum and Gas Engineering, Federal University of Technology, Mina. A round of applause for Professor Mukhtar Abdul Qadir. A round of applause for him. Professor Mukhtar Abdul Qadir, you're most welcome, sir. Our moderator for panel session 2, we welcome you all the way from the Department of Petroleum and Gas Engineering, Federal University of Technology, Mina. Thank you, sir. You're most welcome. Very, very quickly, we also have joining us on stage, right here, we'll just be fine, great. We also have joining us on stage our first panelist, Director, Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS. Please make welcome Mr. Lucky Chukwudi Obodoeke. Round of applause for him. This time it is pretty much free seating for all of our panelists, so feel free to maximize the space. Thank you, sir. Director, FIRS, Mr. Lucky Chukwudi Obodoeke. You're most welcome. Representing the DG of NOTAP, Dr. Dan Azumi Muhammad Ibrahim, is Mrs. Olamide Akinkumi. Round of applause for her. Thank you very much. You're most welcome. It's an honor to have you with us today. The Group Managing Director of Cypher Crescent, Mr. Thangod Egbe. Round of applause for him. Mrs. Olamide Akinkumi, representing the DG of NOTAP. Thank you very much, ma'am. You're most welcome. We trust that you bring warm tidings from the DG of NOTAP. Thank you. Group MD, Cypher Crescent, Mr. Thangod Egbe. Thank you, sir. You're most welcome. Representing the Project 100 beneficiaries. Pretty much Project 100 is a framework for providing institutional support for 100 indigenous oil and gas service providers. And yes, this is an initiative of the Ministry of Petroleum Resources and the NCDMB. Please join me to welcome the Managing Director, Ospoint Limited, Mr. Ugochukwu Nkwocha. A round of applause for him. You're most welcome. It is an honor to have you with us today. And the Chief Innovation Officer of NNPC Limited, Muniru Muhammad Mai, is represented today on the panel by none other than Abubakar Mudi. A round of applause for him as he joins the panel. Thank you very much, sir. You're most welcome. We trust that you bring glad tidings from the CIO, Chief Innovation Officer of NNPC Limited. You're most welcome, sir. Mr. Moody, you're most welcome. Right there would just be fine. All right. Realty potential from R&D investment. We'll listen to the lead presenter. Mr. Moderator, over to you. Let the conversation begin.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Very quickly, I must start by thanking the NCDMB and FIRS for organizing this awesome workshop. Very quickly, taxation has been accepted globally as an indispensable means for funding a country's activities, which include research and development. As a result, the World Bank postulated that a minimum tax to GDP ratio of 15% is required by a country to be able to meet basic amenities for its people and carry out further research and development. According to a report released by IMF, the highest tax to GDP ratio in 2020 were observed in Denmark. Denmark has a ratio of 47.4%, followed by France, which has 47.3%, and then finally by Belgium, which has 45.4%. Now, unfortunately, a combination of the 31 African countries gave out a net of 16%. And again, unfortunately enough, Nigeria has a ratio of 5.5%. In a recent assessment, again, by the World Bank, countries outside and within Africa are dedicating a significant amount of their GDP into research and development. For instance, China dedicates 2% of their GDP. Now, it's important I mention this, not just mentioning ratio, because somebody will say, when you mention 0.5, what does 0.5 mean? China dedicates 2.5% of a GDP of $17.73 trillion. United States of America dedicates 3.4% of a ratio of, their, what do we call it, their GDP is 23.3%. Germany dedicates 4.6%. Total GDP is $833.5 billion US dollars. Unfortunately, like I've mentioned before, Nigeria dedicates only 0.13% of $440.83 billion. The $65,000 question is, why is Nigeria not performing the way it should? The answer in one word is, we don't have a strong intellectual property. Somebody may now ask that, if you have a strong intellectual property, what does it lead to? The interesting thing is, a strong intellectual property strengthens royalty, and that is the main reason why we are here today. So we are going to be interrogating royalty potentials from research and development. So I'll be starting with FIRS. So my first question to FIRS is, the Finance Act 2021 has made strong provisions on tax reliefs associated with research and development investments that lead to a breakthrough. Can you elaborate on these incentives and how oil and gas companies can file returns and claim the reliefs? Thank you. FIRS, please.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers for this opportunity. Because one of the major takeaways from this event is going to be the knowledge of tax incentives that are available. I know many of us in the hall are not in the business of taxation, so I am going to, first of all, go and speak to the issues of tax incentives so that they will understand what actually is in the menu. Then I will come back to look at the provisions in the law relating to R&D. Tax incentives are granted by government through legislation as benefits that will reduce the tax payable by entities. It comes in different forms. It comes in the form of full exemptions from paying. It may come in the form of a holiday, don't pay for a given period of time. It may come in the form of tax credit, that you have a liability and government says, oh, out of this liability, I'm actually dashing you, let me use local language, giving you some amount to take away. It may also be because we have waivers. Government can also grant waivers. All these are routes through which incentives are given, but these are in our laws. Incentives are all about laws. They are contained in our tax laws. So if an incentive does not exist in the tax law, FIRS will not implement it. In fact, it doesn't exist. Let me also say that the law also grants, Nigerian laws specifically, also grant those who are in political authority, the president or ministers, some leeway to grant some waivers. We call it derogatories. Sometimes you may have a project that is of very crucial nature to the country. The president may ask that all taxes relating to such project be waived. It does happen. So incentives are contained in various laws, from VAT for company income tax and all this. But let me come to the one that relates to why we're here. The incentives that will go for R&D. Let's look at how R&D is carried out, there are two generic ways. We have entities that will go into proprietary research and development. They want to do it to improve their processes or their products or services on their own. And we also have entities that their main core business is doing R&D. In each of these, the portfolio of incentives vary a little bit. What we have in the law, most of our laws did not make any adequate provision for R&D. And that much has been said in the morning. The major provisions we have on R&D is in the Company Income Tax, which is Income Tax Act. If we look at it deeply, it made a distinction between those who are doing R&D for proprietary purposes, who are given 95% accelerated capital allowance, and those that are into commercialization, who are given not only the 95% accelerated capital allowance, but they also have 20% tax credit. This is there. But for the purpose of this audience, let me also make the following clarifications. You can enjoy incentives by virtue of your location. There are entities that are in the free zones, operating in free zone, whether it's in Nigerian export processing zone or in the oil and gas free zone, that are enjoying tax exemption, full tax exemption. In fact, their law is very generous. They are exempted from federal, state, local government, and there are no sunset provisions. There are also incentives that have sunset provisions, like those who are enjoying pioneer incentives. We have incentives for those who are doing export. So we have a whole gamut of incentives. What is important, in my view, to people who are here is that, one, the issue of what constitutes R&D should be properly defined. In the presentation made this morning, the representative of the Chartered Institute of Taxation talked about this aspect, that even when you look at the act of this board that is organizing this, it is difficult to really pinpoint where R&D starts and where it ends, what it constitutes. Secondly, going outside tax now, we have observed that really in my career in FRS, I cannot remember treating more than 2 entities that are devoted to R&D. It appears there is a phobia for R&D in this side of the world. Maybe we don't see it as one of those businesses that can generate revenue. The lack of information, the lack of awareness on even when you do R&D, how do you commercialize it? Thank God that someone came today to talk about how you can protect yourself and get your intellectual property registered. Are we really fully aware of these provisions? The funding for R&D, they say he who plays the piper dictates the tune. Most of the little R&D that has been carried out that we have seen are funded by foreigners. And if that is the case, even when you have finished the product, they will take it to their home country, patent it, and bring it back to you. There is a live example of a bank in Nigeria that used Nigerian people to develop a software that was used.
Sorry a minute, please, a minute. Let me just give you this question so that you'll be thinking about it while I continue with the next person.
All right.
Throughout your presentation here, you are talking about the laws, how does the law apply to basic and applied research? Are the laws the same? That is number one. Number two, you talked about funding, and you said the little amount they put in. How little is little? Think about this too, please. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes. Ospoint Limited. So again, an interesting oil and gas renewable management consultancy company. I've seen some interesting work you people have been doing. However, I have the following observation that I would like you to comment on. Multinational companies like Shell, ENI, Total have occupied the global space. And why is that the case? It is because of their huge investment in research and development. So my question now is, your company, how do they intend to differentiate themselves from the multinational oil companies that I just mentioned? Then outline the incentives that you think will encourage R&D strategy. So let me stop here for now.
Hello. All right. Thank you very much. It's quite interesting. NCDMB has done a lot of work. I think my company is one of the beneficiaries of what they've done. And having been here today, I've listened to so many presentations and so many people talking about the incentives, research and development, and things like that. To be very honest with you, as a company, before now, we haven't seen this as an investment. Okay, so we look at a research and development as something that we do, or if we do it, we don't know where the income is going to come from. But this has really exposed me to quite a lot of angles. I know there's some teething problems that have been outlined in terms of the policies, the taxations and incentives and all that, bringing that together. But as a company, what I would think would be nice for us, for example, when you look at research and development, there's a lot of studies that go into, that go down the line before you actually get the product and commercialize it. So it would be good for companies like ourselves to be able to have access to those studies that have been done. For example, NCDMB has a research department or whatever. They've done a lot of studies, right from materials to other things. So it makes it a lot easier. If we have access to this data, it can help us in the way to develop things that we need. So bringing this specifically, we're in the marine sector. So we have marine assets, right? The speaker from NCDMB talked about, a lot of the build, everything comes from outside the country. So at the end of the day, even though a local company gets the contract, but a lot of the proceeds or whatever goes out, right? I mean, we would love to develop some of our spare parts. They're very little small spare parts that are used constantly. And some work, as I know, have been done around that area by NCDMB. So getting access to those data would help us quite a lot. I hope it makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, sure, makes sense. But finally, again, I would like you to think, again, outside the box. What drives your patency? What drives it? Is it something you just decide within your company, and then maybe you just come up with a new product or something like that? Or is there a driver outside your company? Do you get my point? I mean, is the question clear? Okay, please think about it, please. I'll come back to you. Now, NNPCL, no longer business as usual. Recently, you migrated into a commercial entity or a commercial company. Now, the question now is, what strategies, or a strategy dependent on that, is NNPCL implementing to differentiate itself from the other multinational oil companies or from where you migrated from?
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I bring you goodwill from the management of NNPC and the Chief Innovation Officer, Mr. Munir Mai, who is unavoidably not here. So in order to address your question, let me take us down memory lane just a little bit, just to give some context around R&D in NNPC, where we were before, and the ultimate vision now, right? So many of us are aware of the establishment of NNPC in 1977 through a decree that merged the then National Oil Corporation and the Ministry of Petroleum Resources. Section 5 of that decree mandated NNPC to carry out research in connection to petroleum and anything derived from it, and promote activities for the purpose of turning into account the results of such research. So as at then, and in line with that mandate, a research and development division was created based in Port Harcourt. And it had a mission to engage in research, develop technologies, and also provide services to the oil and gas industry. It was envisaged that that outfit will grow to become a world-class petroleum research center driven by innovation. I'll be modest enough to say it has achieved some measure of success, including reduction in the unit cost of producing crude oil by about 15%, and also working with our partners, NCDMB here, amongst others, to domesticate the EPC aspect of the oil and gas industry. Right. So now, again, we are witnesses to how rapidly the oil and gas industry is transforming, the energy industry actually, and in order to stay ahead of the curve, the NNPC in 2020 restructured the research function, right? And that led to the establishment of this new division, Research, Technology, and Innovation Division, which is now based in Abuja. The old R&D division, based in Port Harcourt, was merged with NNPC Oilfield Services to continue to provide services to the oil and gas industry. So the RTI division, the new one, coming at a time of at the time of the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act and the incorporation of NNPC, was initially structured across 6 thematic areas: the upstream innovation, downstream innovation, R&P innovation, cybernetics and automation, and energy innovation. The division was mandated to champion productive research, technology development, and sustainable innovation towards supporting performance of NNPC subsidiary operations. And already we have seen some of the results, right? We have implemented some solutions that have led us to acquire some patents, and the robotics process automation also, which has led to cost savings and time savings as well in NNPC operations. So I had to take us this to appreciate where we are now coming into. To answer the question, strategies that NNPC will need to deploy to stay, in the forefront of technology development in the energy industry. We have mentioned one, collaboration, and so that is quite key. Partnerships and collaboration and the triple helix. So the RTI is collaborating with leading organizations that have carved a niche for themselves in the global research community, right? So academic institutions like MMU, Manchester Metropolitan University, the King Mohammed University in Morocco, and even in Nigeria, we have some relationships with FUTO. So that collaboration is still ongoing. And secondly, the idea of placing some of our young professionals in those kind of organizations so that they can be mentored and also develop the right skills to contribute to research and innovation. So these are just a few of the strategies that we are working at. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I will be coming back to you. But again, I would like you to have, to think about this. We all know that the world is a global village. Whatever technology you intend to come up with, there is a need for you to compare with other climates. So that at the end of the day, what is new about what you are bringing in can be clearly defined. Don't forget, when we say innovation, people think it must be something new. No, it can be a modification to a part. It can be a modification to a process. So what climate are you looking at? Then research, are you looking at digitization as a new strategy? Again, I'll come back to you on that. Now, Safa Crescent. We know Safa Crescent as a leading example of companies leading the benefits of research and development. And we know, as I've also worked with you guys. So my question is, please tell us your success story in software development. So what are the key lessons? What are the key lessons for upcoming companies and then companies that are already there, but they want to get to the promised land? Thank you.
Hello. Okay, yes. All right, thank you, Prof. A nice session, really commendable from NCDMB and FIRS to put this together. We'll tell you about our success story and also our failure story too. Yes, we are a dedicated 100% engineering research company. He says that he has not seen in his history R&D company. We are 100% dedicated. We are 100% Nigerian. We employ all our employees from Nigerian universities, and we have developed world-class solutions that are being used by oil and gas industries in Nigeria. When we started, people doubted us that you cannot develop a solution that will be used by the oil and gas industry in Nigeria. And we said, look, we have most of our promoters of the company have actually worked all the clients in the world. And so just to look at it, how did we succeed? First of all, we are not a software development company. We're actually an R&D company, engineering research. We have 5 key research departments: petroleum engineering research, chemical engineering research, machine learning IoT, applied mathematics research department, and software development. And we have one of the strongest applied mathematics department probably in the country that is divided into 5. We have people working on linear algebra, people working on mathematical modeling, people working on partial differential equation, computational geometry. These are all elements of what you need to actually run R&D in the country. We started, of course, really very expensive. We've been there for 10 years. And for you to look at how long you need to do R&D in the country, you start looking at what do you need to put, what incentives you need to put. We've developed our software, it goes beyond just looking at software development, but it has to be very intentional to look at who is actually funding the software development. If not that, we have a couple of persons who have dedicated, who have the mindset of long-term of R&D. You can't be running a software development company for 10 years now, and you are not profitable. I'm sure people see us as really very successful, but it's actually challenging to actually run a company dedicated into R&D. And you start looking at our shareholders, start looking at it, look, you are doing R&D, other companies not doing R&D are actually more profitable than yourself. And they start looking at, oh, we need to cut down our R&D spending. We need to take our R&D spending to the universities. We actually collaborated with NCDMB to actually look at triple helix and looking at the whole collaboration that you want to look at to put up that. We've actually recently moved our R&D department to University of Port Harcourt so that they should be able to define that, because most of like 60-70% of our expenditure is on R&D. How do we cut that down? Are the discussions that we start looking at. So it's actually really challenging to run R&D in the country. And I must say that probably the laws and what the incentives you have around the country does not support R&D. And most persons will start looking at, should I go into R&D? You set up an engineering research company. Before you can actually reap some money from there, that will be like 5 years. Where will you start the modeling aspect, the software aspect? And you're working with the oil and gas industry. It's actually the industry where you have one of the most intelligent people. So once you go into R&D, you go into software development, they take you to the classroom. It's like they are challenging, can you develop this? And sometimes some things that are being done outside the country, and we do it here. I've had the privilege to work in over 15, 20 countries. I've led R&D in, I was working for Shell in a lot of countries around all the companies you mentioned there. But you come back to Nigeria, you see still Nigerians actually promoting R&D in those countries, in those centers. But those same Nigerians come to Nigeria to actually market their R&D product. You see them as actually inferior because they don't have a white skin. But basically, they are the one leading R&D there. So we'll come around and start looking at, and you are being priced R&D at not probably the same cost that R&D is being priced outside. We develop our software. We stand shoulder to shoulder. We tell them, look, the guys who are actually developing most of this software outside the country, we are working with them, Nigerians who can develop this software. But once you develop it outside the country, they pay more. Once you develop it inside the country, they pay less, and you are paid in Naira. But basically, most of the guys supporting you in the research because they are actually experts, they have options of actually working in the industry to give them money in USD. So you have to force yourself to pay in USD. So it's actually challenging. The success stories are there. We won the R&D award, of course, best indigenous R&D company in 2019 in SP conference. We actually came in second in R&D innovation in terms of behind Shell and ahead of Chevron in Nigeria in 2019. Actually shows some things that we've done. But the funding that we had then has been withdrawn by a lot of person funding because they are not seeing the benefit. Really challenging to put up that. So those are some kind of things. I saw the lead presenter, the presentation he made. Very insightful presentation about those challenges. Those 5 challenges are actually the 5 challenges that we have case history around, and we are doing something. And one is the whole funding. How do you get funding? Loans, of course. You get loans at about 30-something% interest rate per year. Data, we struggle to get data. In most other countries, you want to get data, there will be abandoned fields for you to use for data. But in Nigeria, we can't get abandoned fields. We have to actually build our own data, and that's costing us sometimes close to $200,000, $300,000 to be able to get those data. We start looking at infrastructure. What do you need? From R&D, engineering research perspective, you need things like mass library, you need dynamic link library. Who is actually doing R&D to supply that to you? It's not being done. It's part of probably what NCDMB and FRS can actually do to provide these libraries and encourage part of the de-risking the whole R&D process. We're also looking at in terms of another problem that we identified that we're solving is also probably call it network intelligence. How do you have like an ecosystem of researchers? So we're developing a research and innovation network that we're going to use to connect researchers in the universities, probably from a triple helix perspective. Those things will be done to help to give us the libraries that we need to actually develop that. And finally, education too. Is difficult. Actually, we'll get somebody from the university, we train them for 2 years, 3 years before they can actually fit into the R&D we do. So now we're partnering with University of Port Harcourt to create an energy technology institute that will be used to train young graduates so that whatever they finish from school, they're able to work with us. So basically, it's actually challenging doing R&D in the country. The potentials are high. You can actually scale what you are doing, but you need to have the adequate funding, adequate data, infrastructure, network, and the educational qualifications of people working with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, it's actually an interesting something about a local company, 100% Nigerians. Now, one of the presenters did say something about Hanibotham and then Slombiji. In particular, Slombiji, we know they have software like PipeSim, Olga, And I know that Cypher Crescent is developing something in that line. So my question is, how will you compare what you have and what Slombiji is presently having? I'll come back to you on that, but just think about it. NOTAP, your mandate includes promoting the intellectual property rights of researchers. How can you elaborate on the existing royalty potentials if Nigerian companies invest in research and development leading to proprietary technologies? So please, I would like you to be mindful of one of the first presenters did say something about this protection of intellectual properties. So you can just avoid what he said and then tell us others. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. First and foremost, I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity given to NOTAP, particularly the Director General of NOTAP, whom I'm standing in for. NOTAP is one of the agencies under the Federal Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. And some of our mandates include regulation of inflow of foreign technology between Nigerian companies and their foreign technical partners. And we have been doing this for years to facilitate technology transfer. And in the course of evaluating this technology, we realized that there is technology gaps because most of these companies, their R&D are based abroad, and notably by virtue of our mandate, it is expected that when a company is paid royalty over a long period of time, we expect that there should be a kind of domestication plan whereby the technology is transferred. But in as much that these R&D investments are carried out abroad, there is no room for Nigerian researchers to actually be involved in the technology transfer process. So one of the mandates that has been given to us is to promote intellectual property rights of researchers. And we are doing this successfully because right now, as I speak, we have 64 intellectual property technology transfer offices localized in our tertiary institutions. Right now, in collaboration with some of these companies, some of these laboratories in some universities, federal universities, have been upgraded to a tune between 50 million to 100 million naira based on the area of specialization of the sponsor companies. Be that as it may, you know, royalty payment from any proprietary technology, nobody is a Father Christmas. Once you carry out research and development, it is expected that you are expecting something in return in form of royalties. And this royalty cut across different types and different forms, depending on the type of agreement that is being entered into. IP, let me just quickly chip in terms of IP, because people are talking of patent. Yes, it's important to have intellectual property. But at times, if you have IP rights, some patent can be an asset, at the same time it can be a liability. That is what differentiates the big companies and the developing companies and developing countries, in the sense that when you look at their research and development investment, they are actually deliberate. They are not just in the laboratory or anywhere carrying out research for the fun of it. They are deliberate because they know what their target is. Then another thing is that intellectual property is territorial in nature. Once you have your patent covered in Nigeria and is actually registered in Nigeria, it's an exclusive right only valid in Nigeria. When you have another target market, you need to really look into your target market and seek protection around that invention and innovation. And that explains why some companies right now that were in existence before, they are no longer in existence because they failed to innovate. They failed to carry out R&D investment. They failed to face the reality on ground. Innovation is not, it could be new, but at times there is what we call radical innovation, incremental innovation, which any company can dwell into. Our own model in NOTAP, apart from because we have seen a lot of royalty payments being taken outside the shore of Nigeria, because some of these nurses are in Naira. But if you are paying your technical partner in US, definitely you cannot remit Naira. So it has to be in their currency, either dollars, euros, or pounds, as the case may be. So what that happens to our own indigenous technology? That is why we have now taken it upon ourselves in NOTAP to promote indigenous technology and to ensure that intellectual property rights are embedded and protected. And intellectual property right does not exclude only patent. Even your trademark, but so far that trademark is associated with manufacturing of that particular product or services. Industrial design is there. Many other intellectual, even copyright is there. Your manual, your know-how, formulae, all these are embedded as copyright. So these are some of the issues that need to be addressed in order for a company to be able to generate enough royalties. And mind you, another thing is that the value of a company is based on the tangible assets. Gone are those days where company assets are based on the tangible properties. Yes, it's part of it, but the intangibles, many companies are making a lot of money from intangible. And different potentials are, you can enter into a technical know-how agreement. If you have a know-how that is new, you can enter into a non-exclusive agreement. You can enter into exclusive agreement. A company can decide to enter into sole exclusive agreement. Non-exclusive, you can decide to license your know-how to different companies at the same time. While you are in the comfort of your company, people are paying royalty through that means. Then another issue now is that, companies, people talk about companies investing in R&D, but there are people which we call inventors that are in that company, churning out all these inventions and innovations. That is why in our organization, in our agency, we have different categories of people we interact with. We interact with the academia, we interact with companies, we interact with innovators and inventors. And we bring them together so that, because you have different obligations and responsibilities that each of these parties provide. In a license agreement, what you are to look for, because many a times, even in the oil and gas sector, we discover that some of them, because they have offshore accounts, they don't bother to present their agreement. But in a typical agreement, what you should look for is the definition. Once we see an agreement, we evaluate it from 3 different perspectives. First, what are you bringing on board? What is the licensee paying for? What is the licensor bringing to the table? Look, at times, even in the patent office, now they have discovered that many of these foreign companies, they are now coming to Nigeria to register their patent. Before, years back, they don't come, they don't even bother. They believe that Nigeria is a dumping ground. But now they are sensing that now, yes, there is an agency really looking out for that. Even if you want to license your trademark, we ask, is the trademark registered in Nigeria? If it's not registered in Nigeria, you cannot be paying for what is not registered in Nigeria, because all these IPR are territorial in nature. So when you look at some of these oil and gas, some of them have come up with different title and agreement. Technical know-how, management service, technical know-how is tied to percentage of net sales.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, madam. Now, PwC, please very briefly. We have listened to you, and then you yourself have listened to other presenters. What other insights do you actually have for us?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think clearly we can see that the issue of research and development is not something that we should take with levity or just stay as an aside thing. It's something that we need to be deliberate about. It's something that will require the best of us, focusing on it and diligently working together to make value out of it. And that's the reason why some of the basic issues that we're struggling with as a country, we just need to quickly get them behind us. You know, things like not having currency, not being able to organize election, struggling with security. You know, those are issues that as a serious country, we have more important things to focus on, or else the rest of the world, they will leave us behind. And not only in oil and gas. I'm from a town where we produce cocoa. We've been producing cocoa for more than 100 years. How have we leveraged on R&D to be able to add value to cocoa? And we've seen exactly the same thing happening in other sectors, including oil and gas. We as a country, we don't have refining capacity. Is that not R&D as a result of deficiency in our R&D? So we need to wake up. We need to consider R&D as vital, as important, have policies to drive it forward. Of course, tax incentive may be a step in the right direction. That would not be enough. I've heard the contribution of NOTAB, I've heard the contribution of FIRS, some of the practitioners in the industry. But if we look around, in terms of what we have achieved, we can see clearly that yes, a lot has been done, but we are far from the finish line. We need to get our hearts together and make the right level of investment in terms of personnel, in terms of capacity building, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of coordinating and organizing ourselves to ensure that we're able to get it right in the R&D space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, some of the presenters did talk about the so-called triple helix, which is about the academia, the industry, and the government. The essence of the government is to create what they call the enabling environment. Unfortunately, in Nigeria as we speak, that kind of symbiosis basically is not there. It's lacking. So my question to all of you is, how can that, what we call collaboration gap, how can it be shortened so that our universities can have the requisite kind of equipment for them to do research? We all know research is not cheap. Research is very, very expensive. So the $65,000 question now is, what can we do to make sure that that collaboration gap is shortened so that we get to the promised land? Please, one minute, please. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Earlier on, you asked two questions. Earlier on, you asked two questions which have been kept in abeyance for a while. I will just do short. I am sure the interest.
Start from there.
I'm sure the interest of the people gathered here is on applied research. What can be put, translate into reality and can be used in the industry. You also talked about law. Yes, I think a few things can be done with respect to our laws, and it will taper down to this, your last question. First, our tax laws are not very robust in terms of R&D. So one of the things that I think should be done is oftentimes amendments to tax laws emanate from difficulties and gaps identified in society and industry. So take home from this kind of gathering can trigger such amendment to the laws. There is also the need for collaboration. I do ask, if you look at the apex lawmaking institution in the country, they have committees for different aspects of our national life, but they don't have a committee for tax. It's a major gap. And I know that now that we have a 10th assembly coming in, perhaps pressure from institutions and organizations like what is happening here can also be a stepping stone to help to get that done. Let me also come down a little bit to my area, tax. The incentives that are there, they have some qualifications going with it. The expenses that are going to be allowed when you make your reserves for 10%, which is to be allowed as an expense, please remember those expenses must be wholly, reasonably, exclusively, and necessarily incurred for the research and development that we are talking about. If it is not there, the taxman will look at it and say, see, you have spent so much, but this amount, you used it in doing Owambe. It is not part of the expenses we will allow. So let us also try and work with professionals, like while not soliciting for professionals that are here, but there are people who are trained to guide you on how to arrange your expenses so that it will pass the test of being allowed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Ospoint.
Hello. Well, basically, there are gaps, as been identified in this summit or whatever today. It's a way to bring everyone together, interested parties, and make it easy for people like us to use. We want an easy system that we can use, be able to remit taxes, where we remit taxes, be able to get the funding and the support that we need. I would say that, yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. So the NNPCL.
Thank you very much. So to address this question of linkage between the academia and the industry, it's really, like you said, a symbiotic relationship. The academia provides some form, the industry can fund research activities in the academia, and we have already